Might be the headphones. Apologies for that. I'll turn my mic down ever so slightly. See if that helps.
You're all good.
Are we live?
Yes, we are. Hello.
So we're sitting here chatting away because we've got chat going on. Apologies for that. We just went live as we were chatting. But hello. Hopefully you can hear us and our levels are about the same. In fact, I'm about to change mine slightly because apparently there's a slight echo. So if you're hearing an echo, please do tell us after I've done the change. So I'm just about to go do that.
Why is this fucking camera drives me crazy? You shouldn't be able to see that far over there, but I can. Whatever, I'll just cheat. No, that's not fixing. Fix, damn you. Hold on, I'm gonna deal with this. Hello, everyone. Hopefully, you're all having a lovely day.
Super professional and slick this week. Okay, right. I've just turned my volume down slightly. I'm gonna press OK on that. Has that changed things? Is it too bad for everybody out there?
Well, I can still hear myself.
Oh dear, that's not good.
Other than that, you sound good.
Okay, let's turn it down a bit more. Okay, let's try that. Is that making a difference?
Testing. That's better. That's good.
That's better. Okay,
yes,
good.
That's better.
Okay, excellent. Right, so yeah, apologies for our super professional start there. You know, sometimes things don't just go as slickly as we prefer, but that's Lorebeards for you. It's half the fun. I'm slightly quieter than Sotek. That's
Well, I can always turn myself down just a smidge.
If you turn yourself down just a smidge,
yeah.
I think that'll be easier than me turning down so we can get rid of the echo. That'd be really good. So I'm really looking forward to today because this is a topic I've been wanting to discuss for a while because it's somewhat of a favorite of mine. I really like ghouls. And as you're going to find out from my intro, I really like ghouls in a way that perhaps might surprise some folk out there, but I really like ghouls. So this is going to be a fun one. This is also my somewhat belated birthday stream. Now, obviously, this was originally planned, this particular topic, and this stream some 3 weeks ago. Well, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks back? 2 weeks ago.
Yes,
yeah, 2 weeks. And we're arriving at this one ever so slightly late because of various shenanigans that happen behind the scenes. But we're here eventually. So if you wish to say happy birthday to me, today is the day. Because it's sort of my birthday, although you may notice my jingly little reindeer ears. We're closer to Christmas than to my birthday nowadays.
Just barely, just a smidge.
Yeah, just slightly.
Yeah, but yeah, so this is the kind of finale for this year of celebrating the birthday of one of Nagash's original Dreadlords.
Thanks for that. Hashtag old.
But yeah, this one should be really fun. Ghouls are fantastic. I adore them a lot, and their lore is, as we get into it today, there's a really fun, unintentional setup of how they're viewed in the old world versus what is more likely the truth behind them, which adds in a lot of really fun stuff. And if you know your broader Warhammer lore, they open a lot of questions that we're going to tackle today, which is going to be a really good time.
It's basically the classic can of worms that we're about to pop, and those worms are going to go, hello! Because, yeah, there are some worms sitting in the various crypts that the ghouls reside in, and we're going to be very much exposing them to the light of day, which they're not going to enjoy. But, hey, we can do it, because it's sort of my birthday. Sort of.
Yeah. So, just a couple of quick things. We are going to be doing one more Lorebeards before Christmas and kind of like the end of the year and everything. Which will be Joseph Bugman next week over on the Loremaster of Sotek channel. We also decided after we talked about it after the Wednesday stream, which was a ton of fun, by the way, if you haven't watched that yet, the Building of Lisbon City, that we're going to try and finish it this upcoming Wednesday. So we're going to do it.
Unless we change our mind.
Hopefully. Possibly. Something might change. Like if Andy's like, my hand, and like, you know, obviously we have to pivot. But well, that is the current plan, and hopefully we'll finish it. I need to bug Andy, which I will do after the stream, to open up a thread on his Discord as well. But I have a thread open on my Discord where people have been submitting ideas. It's okay. I'll remind you at the end of the stream.
Yeah, do that. My fault entirely. I'll bring it up and pop it over there so that
that way you can join us for that, and you can submit your ideas beforehand if you're like, I can't make it on that Wednesday time, but you really want to submit an idea for us to consider. I've been sorting through those, but hopefully you're all having a wonderful week, as I'm sure a lot of people are getting into that mixture of the joy of the holidays with the stress of the holidays. Hopefully you're a little bit more on the first side, depending on your situation in life. But we hope you can at least take a load off and have some fun with us here. So with that out of the way, we're going to go through our super chats and stuff. As always, we do them in batches between kind of like breathing points. So we're going to go ahead and get the ones that have showed up kind of before and at the start of the stream. Woo, and we'll go from there. All right. Yes, and also please pre-order Dark Ease, which I did see some more people on the Discord loving, thankfully, so nice. Pushing pictures of theirs arriving, which is great and awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, makes for a very good Christmas present for yourself or your family or people that enjoy board games. Because if you have a friend like my buddy Jacobs, there are people that collect board games like they are sacred artifacts. And Dark Deeds is a good one to have in your collection. So, Roderick, I'll probably have to watch this later, but I came here to say Ghouls on Tour, which must be a song reference because I saw a lot of people spamming it, but I'm not very well cultured, so I don't know that song. Darius, if Charlie Kelly and Frank Reynolds encountered ghouls, could they trick them into not attacking them or even form an alliance? If those probably yeah, it would probably be very I feel like it would be more of an unintentional thing of them not realizing what ghouls are and thinking that they're just like people with an extreme addiction to a substance and they would hang out with them
and yeah, they would the same thing.
Yeah, I feel like they would very much end up with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Darius, thanks for streaming on the customs and culture of my country of Canada. Ah, yes, of course. Canadian ghouls, as we all know them. Magadrop, if Ghoul was a Mortark, would it be Ushoran or someone else? So Ushoran is the Ghoul-aligned Mortark. We'll talk about that as part of Ghouls, why they're so heavily associated with the Strigoi, because there is a story there that is actually quite interesting. So, and it's
kind of bullshit.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly bullshit story, but it does have an interesting. The thing I like about it is it's not what you think it is. You may think you know what it is, and you're wrong. Like I could guarantee you, if you think you're like, oh, I could see the history here and how ghouls are associated. No, that's not how it works, which makes it interesting to me, but also makes
completely.
Bizarrely not make sense.
Completely, but also it's sort of bullshit, but we'll get into that. But not bullshit in a bad way. It's literal bullshit. If you look at it, it seems to be much more propaganda than it is actually true, which is also super fun.
And the actual reason is kind of depressing, but we'll get into it. Yep. Indigo, unrelated. I know Andy dislikes the idea of Oni being ogres, but that's what they are in essence, IRL. What if Kami warped them into something else if they arrived over in Cathay or Nippon? Less fat and hunger, more for glory, prestige.
That would definitely be one answer. But I would disagree that that's what Oni basically are. I would say that you could certainly interpret them that way. But that you could very easily just go, elves are only humans. Because they look like humans, except they've got slightly pointy ears. The differences between elves and humans in terms of their overall appearance is next to negligible. They're basically identical. And you could argue that ogres and Oni are basically identical. Doesn't mean they're the same. And that doesn't mean you should necessarily take the whole Oni idea and go, I want them to be the same thing that's in the Warhammer world already, and conflate the two. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't. There's different ways that you could take it and different ways that the world building could be done.
Yeah, the way I would say it is, it's an avenue you could take, but it would be good to explore all of them first and see which one ends up working best, as opposed to just taking what is the most obvious route. Because the obvious route would be to say, oh, they're just ogres, and that's just what the Nipponese know ogres as. But that might not be the best route. Just like how like Centaurs and Centaurs, very similar, not even remotely the same thing.
Totally.
Morning to Crescent. Did Nagash ever have a ghoul friend? We'll get into that. I would not say they were his friends. It's not the way I would put it. But Nagash just doesn't have friends, to be frank. The T-Bone, stupid unrelated idea. But if Nippon was going to get its own army, I want their centerpiece to be a Godzilla ripoff. I would not put it past Games Workshop. Also, happy birthday. That would not be hugely surprising.
I think that if you're doing a Nippon army list and you don't include some reference to kaiju of some sort, then are you doing Nippon?
Yeah, and especially because Warhammer would do well with tackling the whole thing of like there are two very different versions of Godzilla as the defender and the natural disaster. And
Yep.
Warhammer plays with those themes very, very well. So hopefully that's something they would do a good job adapting if we ever get it.
I would also suggest that if you're adapting the Pawn, take a look at the overall cultural impact in Japan of the various wars that had come previously, particularly the World Wars, and just look at all of the cultural output of Japan from pretty much 1940 onwards, which is all we have recovered from a gigantic disaster. And everything ranging from all of the animes with the big explosion that occurred and left us with this new world, Akira, all of them pretty much follow a similar route. Not all, that's far too sweeping, but definitely you'd want to include all of those different cultural touchstones. But again, creating Warhammer, not just equivalents, but Warhammer stories that make sense within that world. But there's a whole manner of really strong, I mean, even Godzilla is very much born of that. So you'd be looking to build up good Warhammer stories that create similar outcomes, but for very different reasons.
And hopefully hire some Japanese writers, which would be so cool because Japan has such a fascinating way of interpreting stories that is very different from what we do in the West a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why our version of Nippon in Lorehammer is very strongly helped by Japanese people, because strangely enough, one of our players is half Japanese and knows a lot of Japanese people, which is really, really useful.
Wow, who would have thought?
Who'd have thought? And some of the ideas that have been brought to the table through that have been just bluntly exceptional. Ones I've never considered.
Sean Schultz, is this Andy's birthday year? Due to goofs? It's more like a birthday month. Also, is Andy part of Ghoul Mob? What is your favorite Ghoul character?
Ghoul Mob, I don't know the phrase. Am I missing something there?
I'm just going to say yes, even though I don't know what it refers to.
Sounds good to me. Favorite Ghoul character? There's not really strictly Ghoul characters. You've got yourself the, in Warhammer at least, you've got yourself the Ghoul Kings, Strigoi, and exactly their influence upon the ghouls as a whole, but we don't really get a proper Ghoul character, which I lament.
Yeah, they do say why in the lore, though it's... We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. I'm just going to leave it at that. Siri just streamed a 10K point AOS game. Oh, my God. Is there a lore reason Ushoran and his ghouls would have whipped so hard? Oh, they're on bad dice, huh? Thanks for all the hours of entertainment. Yeah, the lore reason would be... So, I mean, Ushoran is he's the Mortarch of delusion. So the idea that his delusions just altered and that him and his guys... He has an aura of madness that warps the... their perception of reality around them. So you could play it as just the reality that they were perceiving was not the battle that they were supposed to be in, but they thought they were doing something very different. Maybe they thought they were at a baseball game or some other pleasant scenario where they weren't as interested in fighting, so they were getting their asses kicked just terribly. Exiled One, cheers lads, let's go Ghouls!
Damn straight.
Yeah, everyone's favorite baseball team. Jonathan Scott, my personal theory is that the ghouls are what humans used to be before the old ones uplifted them, and the devolution is just a return to how things once were. That's a very nasty view of humanity.
Spicy theory.
Spicy theory.
Spicy theory because it's a theory that you could argue is supported by some sources. Particularly older sources where you get to see what humanity used to be like in a couple of places before the arrival of the old ones. They were not in a good place.
Yeah, it's not flattering.
Old. Yeah.
Yeah. Had asked Sotek this during another stream, and I wanted to ask Andy this. How could a gnome be a familiar with what? So it's not a bright wizard; it's an elementalist, which is technically different. But how could a gnome be a familiar?
So I discussed this very briefly in the Ask Me Anything stream that I did on Saturday, which was a surprisingly fun little stream. We had a really good chat about the Winds of Magic and the 8 winds and what attracts them and how it changes people in different ways. And in that one, I suggested that actually it's the wizard that's familiar.
Yep,
because I think that's fun. The gnome is the actual wizard. The wizard is the familiar of the gnome.
Yeah,
I like to view it that way round.
Also, I actually do want to retouch this because someone in chat, Chapter Grim, actually reminded me of this. That yes, in Age of Sigmar, the ghouls are actual characters, as opposed to fantasy where they're not. But once again, we'll get into why that's a thing. But yes, Gormain. Gormain is by far my favorite. He's the ghoul that has the intestines on his head like a wig. He's the judge.
That one. Yeah,
he is a super fun character. His lore is genuinely really good. Because he's one of the only ghouls that can kind of see through the delusion. So he knows what he is, despite the rest of them not. And he makes for a really fun character because of he has a very interesting view on things, and he tends to be your point of view character when you're dealing with ghoul lore, which makes him extra fun. Biofoot, internal Fishman video, took Andy's advice to get a second opinion, was abducted by Greys and probed thoroughly. Good. They didn't find it, and now sitting is a chore. Maybe the real fishmen are the friends we made along the way.
I think, Biofoot, that's definitely the case. For those of you who are deeply confused by this comment, apparently the whole lore of the fishmen can be found up Biofoot's ass, according to good old Sotek over there.
I think I mentioned that somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, and I asked for a second opinion on that one, and apparently he's gone to Aliens for it, and indeed, we have the results.
Well, I mean, that's what can I say? I'm a lore master, not a doctor. You know, that's your fault, not mine. Necromancer Cobalt. We don't offer medical or legal advice here, just to be completely clear. Do crypt ghouls have any relations with crypt horrors? Can't wait to learn more about my favorite damage dealers of Gorse. Yeah, they are.
We'll get to that.
Crypt ghouls that go through a thing. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, we will talk about that because that's one of the core concepts that were added in the 8th edition of the army list and is worth discussing.
Yeah, 8th edition did some cool shit with ghouls, which we'll get into. Watchdog 3079 would say these ghouls as a concept differ very greatly from other ghouls in other settings, similar to D&D, or would we say that they differ greatly?
Not hugely. I mean, the core concept of what they are is not massively different to how it shows up in many other settings, which are basically eaters of the dead.
Yeah, I guess I would say that in my experience, traditionally ghouls tend to be undead in other settings, whereas in fantasy, they're very explicitly alive. Like
actually, wrong. I'm going to be covering that one too, because the lore changes on this. They are very expressly not quite alive now. They were for a very long time expressly alive, but as time went on, that sort of gets eroded and changed. And it gets eroded and changed in two sides, but I'll get to that when I do my intro.
I look forward to that because I will counter argue that based on what I read, caught all with this morning. So this will be an interesting discussion.
This will be an interesting one, totally.
Cameo, happy birthday again.
Thank you very much.
I think we share one. The 8th played Dark Deeds of the Family,
and I quite.
And I lost, but everyone really liked it. The card art too. Good, excellent, good.
It's a super fun game, and I'm delighted that everyone's enjoying it. We've been playing a fair bit here. I've also been playing another game that we're building in the background just now, which is a proper crazy game. So much fun. Mark has just made a version of it online that we're going to be testing between ourselves, which I'm going to be diving into at the beginning of next week, because we've been playing it on my table over here. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one. It's super cool, and I'm hoping that we get to produce it.
Singemeister, Ushoran lives! He's in a book and everything! Yeah, good old Ushoran. He really is the what do you call it? The Schrodinger's Mortark, whether or not he's actually still alive. Colcarian, is there any connection between ghouls, Araby, or Jinn similar to real life? I don't know the story there, but I think not.
And the Ghouls and the Ghouls, and the whole source of the entire word is largely ignored in this particular case. The answer is no. But that doesn't mean that should an Araby be built or rebuilt, that such a thing couldn't be reinterlaced, because the concept of a ghoul, regardless of where it begins, becomes somewhat universal in terms of the application of how ghouls come to be. So that being the case, that could definitely become a core component of whatever is built into Araby. But as it stands, no.
Lador, ghouls, my favorite undead / unalive people. Yeah, they do have a weird classification. We'll get into that.
Okay, I'm wanting to just call this one. Am I super quiet?
So he is the only person who has said that.
Yeah, could other people confirm? That's why I'm checking it. So if we get more than like 2 or 3 saying it, I will do some adjustment at this end.
Yeah, do let us know. Or if I need to come down a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and y'all can just turn your overall
because
up.
I lowered my level slightly because we had some echoing.
Quieter. Seems like okay. It seems
So maybe lower your side a little bit if you can.
kind of quiet, but not super. Just slightly. Okay, I'm gonna turn myself down just a smidge more.
I'll turn myself up just a tiny smidge as well.
I'll go down to like. I'm gonna go down to like 130.
Okay, I've gone up just slightly there. Has that made a difference?
Yeah, let us know if that's better.
Okay, Steve. Blah blah blah. How's my voice? Blah blah blah.
Let's see. Saurus Blood. Can any race become a ghoul? Like, can you have Beastman ghouls? I started Beastman Army, second army for the World War, and look for a theme. So this is something we'll get into because the answer appears to be no.
No.
And we're gonna get into why that's really weird.
Yeah. I'm interesting. Yeah. I'm interested in this one because the answer appears to be no. And yeah, like that's a thing.
A heavy no. Which will so we'll get into that. Nathaniel, can diesel punk or any such early 20th century inspired thing work for Warhammer Fantasy?
Yeah. The strange thing with Warhammer Fantasy is that it gets pretty much repitched with each edition. And as each edition comes along, they tend to take on certain popular stuff of the time, meaning that yes, things not just like diesel pump, but almost any sort of historical recreation with fantasy will often be used. So the answer is, yeah, I can see not only potential applications, many applications, depending on the different factions and species.
Yeah, there. If you know where to look, there are places that you can find what could very easily be described as diesel punk, steampunk. A lot of things that people go, I don't really associate that as like fantasy, like sword and magic. But the Warhammer world is a lot. It's a messy place.
It is.
Kind of like the real world. The bloke person. Hi there, lads. Finally, great to finally get here. There's a ghoul character in the role-playing game, the Ghoul Baron Moussion, Jules de Fontainebleau. Yes, that's true. That is true. From the what's that book? The one that's goddamn it, I can't remember what it's called. Yeah, Barony of the Damned. Great book.
Barony of the Damned. You'd think I'd remember that book because it was the very first book I ever mapped for Games Workshop.
Yeah, we will talk about Moussion because there is some notable notes about it always brought up. It got added to the Ghoul page. I think it's 7th edition, 8th edition, copy pasted, and then added like another paragraph's worth of text.
Yep.
Which we'll get into that. And it ties a lot into our discussion about what ghouls are and why they're weird. Chris 989. I get Ushoran's shtick in AOS, but why is there a Mortarch of Delusion for Nagash? How does that fit his concept in the realm of death? So originally, he's not the Mortarch of Delusion. He was a Mortarch of a very different thing. But he's always been a Mortarch of what I would call perception. Where in Age of Sigmar, this is Age of Sigmar exclusive. There's nothing at all to do with fantasy whatsoever. Ushoran's power in AOS is heavily hinted at that he's always had the ability to manipulate people's perception of reality around him, and that he could influence people to see things the way he sees things. So there's this idea that he used to be this like gorgeous, handsome, beautiful king, and that he turns into a big, horrible ghoul monster. But there are some very cleverly hidden little hints throughout the various books that suggest that no, he's always been the big, horrible monster. It's just that he had control over his ability to manipulate perception. So Nagash sent him out as an envoy. He basically like represented Nagash, and he was this like shining bright example of like Nagash's order and purity and all this stuff. But when he rebels against Nagash traps him in a prison, just tortures the shit out of him for a really long time and breaks his mind. And he loses control over this power, and his delusions are now more like an infection. So Nagash now, Ushoran's not really like a use. Ushoran's more like a wild card. Nagash can't really kill him, so he just tries to sort of wield him against enemies where he knows he'll cause disruption, but he's not loyal to Nagash. He's a messy kind of third party, which is fun because a lot of people were asking for a death faction that was not truly loyal to Nagash, not even like in the slightest, and that's what ghouls kind of always were. So he works well for people that wanted that niche. Jonathan Scott, it said no man can survive being scratched by a ghoul, but is that because of the venom or just that they cause sepsis because of their lack of hygiene? Well, not no man won't survive. Some people will, but they had poison attacks that it literally represents that they're very infectious. If they scratch you, there's a very, very high chance it's going to be infected, which, to be fair, considering that they're constantly scrabbling around in like corpses and eating filth and all this stuff, and they never clean themselves, they have, filth encrusted claws. Like a good example, everybody loves cats. Cats are great. Cats are awesome. They're super cool. Getting bitten by a cat sucks because you have to take these. I've had it. You had to take these giant horse pills for like a month because if you don't, the odds of a cat mouth, the mouths of cats are disgusting. Their bites are very, very infectious and very nasty. And ghouls are very similar with their claws and teeth.
And indeed, though, it goes a bit further. If you go to, say, for example, 5th edition, ghouls quite literally secrete a black poison from their fingers. So you'll find different editions have tackled ghouls quite differently. I'll go into that in my introduction as well. So their poisoned attacks are perhaps more than just infectious, but you'll find it is a question which has different answers here. It's not one that is consistently applied in the lore.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe it could be magic of some kind, which is something we'll kind of talk about. Baron Von Bastard, hello, chaps. Which 2 characters would you put in a room to get the most passive-aggressive chat?
Oh, holy hell, any elf.
Yeah, literally, just any 2 elves.
Or an elf and a dwarf. No, they'll just be aggressive. No, 2 elves. Any 2 elves.
Yeah, if you want, I mean, honestly, literally just throw 2 darts at a board with all the elf characters on it, and it'll be fine. Literally totally any of them.
While we're going
an
here,
elf and Neferata would be quite funny.
Yeah, that would be quite fun.
Brian Lyons, always a good day when I catch Lorebeards live. Oh, that's the Gravelords. Gravelords pen. Totally. So vampire counts. Yeah,
literally perfect for today. I'm going to put it in my hat.
There you go. Glad to see continued success between all the Mortarks that are put into a gladiator style arena and forced to fight to the death. Who would be the last vampire standing of the end times Mortarks? Either
Let's
Neferata. Yeah, it'd probably be, my money would either be on Manfred or Neferata. Because they are better at manipulating situations than the other 7.
The Nameless.
Oh, well, yeah. The Nameless.
If they're at full power, the Nameless eats them all for breakfast.
At full power, the Nameless would probably sweep.
Yeah.
Pretty heavily.
But, and arguably sweep Nagash as well. So powerful is the Nameless. So, yeah. That's probably the one you're looking for.
Yeah, I would say if it's as they're presented for an end time showdown, Nameless would still be.
Yeah,
he'd be difficult to deal with.
Yeah,
I wouldn't. It wouldn't shock me that some bullshit would come up where Manfred would find a way to get him.
The writers would almost certainly say Manfred wins because they often have a boner for Manfred. And that's unfortunate sometimes, but
but based on depiction of capabilities, probably the Nameless.
The Nameless.
All right, so we're all caught up. It's time for intro. Let's get into it.
Alrighty, so intro. Now, I had a completely different intro plan for the first time we were going to do this, which was just before my birthday. The second time I was going to do this intro, I didn't even bother preparing one because I was quite convinced that I would be able to remember what I had already thought I was going to do for my intro on the first one. But this one, I'm going to do something different because I couldn't be bothered coming up or at least remembering what I had before. So this time, I'm going to go a bit personal. Because when it comes to Warhammer lore, we've all got our own stories. We've all got our own things that we first got involved with. And we've all got things that are, to us, important within it. For example, there's a commonly held story that the first army you collect is always kind of going to be your favorite army. There's, to bring up Michael Moorcock, he has a theory that his famous theory about his books is that everyone's favorite eternal champion is the first one that they read. And indeed, this came up in a stream, just the other day over in Lorehammer, where they were discussing other first-time favorites and how those theories apply. No, it wasn't. It was over on the Rookery channel last Saturday. Yeah, so we discussed it there. And ghouls, to me, sort of fall into this category. So that's how I'm going to bring it up. Because I used to have a ghoul army. And that might surprise many people because ghouls are not typically considered to be the undead army of choice. And there's a reason for that. They're rubbish. They're not that great. And in some editions, they are truly terrible. My first ghoul army was for 3rd edition Warhammer. Warhammer armies all the way back in 1991, and I had to double check this before we went live, so I couldn't remember when that book was published. Had ghouls as part of the undead army, and I, for some reason, decided that I liked them. And it's quite interesting because the undead army list, all the way back, it wasn't an undead army list per se, it's the armies book with all the armies all the way through, Warhammer armies. That book there presents a version of ghouls that never changes, ever. It stays consistent from 3rd edition up to 8th. All they do is add more lore. And that lore is pretty much this. Ghouls are, because of their choice of eating, humans gone wrong. Now, the story that gets developed around this significantly changes over the course of the editions. 4th edition completely rewrites it because the story didn't exist before that. It was just they ate something and that made them go wrong and they were cannibalistic, eating the dead. And it turned them into something that was neither really human or undead anymore. And they were very much in the undead army. And ghouls, as they were presented there, appealed to me. I bought a bunch, painted them up. They formed the core of my undead army. And then 4th edition came out. Now, for those of you who don't know your editions very well, this is the first ever big box set for Warhammer. You had the elves and the goblins in this one, with Grom the Paunch facing off against Eltharion the Grim. And the undead army list that was brought out for that, and the undead army list must be 1994, about 3 years after the Warhammer armies. The undead army list repitched the ghouls entirely, and this is the ghouls that we're largely going to be discussing today. Because the ghouls in this version started off as tribesmen that worshipped Nagash. And the great feast, the dark feasts that Nagash led, which was involving quite a lot of cannibalism, turned them into something different. But the story they present here is relatively consistent in that they say that all of the Warpstone and the dark magic in and around Nagashazar, which is where Nagash was, combined with the cannibalism, turned all the tribes of humans that were worshipping Nagash as a god into ghouls. And then these ghouls spread out across the world, and for reasons that were unspecified, from that point onwards, when humans cannibalized, more ghouls were created. So that's pretty much the 4th edition version of what the ghouls were. But I don't care so much about that because I had a ghoul army by this point. And my ghoul army wasn't really like anyone else's ghoul army because I decided when the undead army list came out that I wanted to have an undead army list with no undead in it. And that for me was core. So I had a necromancer leading my army and loads of ghouls. And I loved this because during the course of play, you could summon up skeletons, you could summon up zombies with your necromancers, and the ghouls would come forward like a tide. But in 4th edition, they were super crap. They were great, really powerful, had a couple attacks, which 2 attacks in Warhammer at that point was immense for a core unit. Terrible weapon skill, but weapon skill, as everybody knows, is not that important in Warhammer. It's your strength and your toughness, et al. As long as your weapon skill's not too low, like below 3, it was 2. They weren't that bad, but they were okay. The problem with them in 4th edition was that they had must stop and eat corpses if they beat anyone. And that rule was shit. Because there was no end time added to that. In that, as long as they beat another unit, they wouldn't pursue afterwards. If it fled away, they just stop and they would eat. And continue to do so until another unit came within 12 inches of it. And trust me, people use that rule. They're like, well, that unit stopped. And they hike it off in other directions. And your army was completely stymied. But it made it for a really fun army to play because you had to think really tactically how to use your units. And the ghouls were cheap, so you could have loads of them with your necromancers. And I won a lot with that army, and everyone thought it was stupid because it was a stupid army that really annoyed them because my units were terrible and I was still winning. Because they weren't actually that terrible. 2 attacks, as I say, was really good. Then they started screwing with my shit. Because as we know, the concept of the undead at 4th edition changed as we moved into 5th and 6th. As we shifted from the undead army, which had been the case in 3rd edition and 4th edition, into vampire counts, in one case, or on the other side, the Tomb Kings. And they just get rid of all the other undead. But there was a loophole. The vampire counts is where this loophole lies. The vampire counts in particular were an exceptionally... Unlike the other armies, they got an army list every frickin' edition. 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. Most armies did not. It seemed Games Workshop loved the vampire counts. They did not necessarily sell better than some of the other armies. It is worth noting. But they definitely got a lot of army lists. And then when the 5th edition one came out, the ghouls were in there. And I was like, my army still stands. Now, my army at this point... Okay, so get an idea. We've got necromancers, we got ghouls. I decided to paint all my ghouls purple. I don't know why. I have not... They shouldn't be purple. They shouldn't be purple. But I painted them all purple. And for reasons that to my adult...
They were purple people eaters.
Yeah, apparently. They really were. I wish I'd been that clever. I wasn't that clever. And all their rags that they were dressed in and the bones they were carrying, I did all the bones bone colored and I did all the rags bright yellow. I have no idea why, but my army looked really striking, purple and yellow with all those bones, and all my necromancers were wearing faded purple robes and bones and the like. It all sort of worked, but oh my god, it was a stupid looking army. And it made absolutely no sense in the lore. I have still no idea why I painted it the way I did to this day, but it did look good. Maybe that's why. So I had this big army, and 5th edition came along, and I was a little bit, what the fuck, vampire counts, where's my undead army list? And now they were quite clear at the time, this isn't really overwriting the undead army list, because we've obviously got more places where we're going. Okay, this is basically our first update for a part of the undead army list. And I was like, okay, do I have necromancers and ghouls? Because that's all I really cared about. And the answer was yes. So when 5th edition came rolling in, did they change the lore? Yeah, no, not really. They added the poison attacks, which we mentioned earlier. And those poison attacks were because the ghouls were seeping poison from their claws. And they also got rid of the ghoul feeding rule. And for me, it was a fucking godsend.
Yeah, that's a terrible rule.
it was a terrible rule. And if you don't know much about Warhammer, there was an important rule in 4th, in fact, most of the editions, the rule called marching, which means that all living units can double their movement as they march around on the battlefield. Meaning that the ghouls were quite unlike the rest of the undead. None of the undead could march. None of them could march. Meaning they were a super slow army until you cast magic to speed them up using Van Hel's Dance Macabre. So I had a super fast undead army. It no longer had the issues that it had before, and it had poison attacks. For all my undead army was now a vampire count army, which to me was really funny. There was no vampires or counts in my army. It was all necromancers and ghouls. I was pretty frickin' pleased. This worked well. Then along comes 6th. And 6th was largely the same. I've got my copy of my old 6th edition army up here because I still have it somewhere or another.
You could use the specialist Strigoi army for your ghouls.
Yeah, no, I wasn't using. I wasn't using any Strigoi. No, fuck that. I was just using my ghouls. And in 6th, we got our crypt ghouls added in, and this is where the tone changes completely because they fucked with my shit, and my army became useless because my army was no longer a living army. The core conceit of it. So I sold it. Because they added a new rule to all ghouls. Undead. They got rid of the fact that they were living. And they said, they're now undead. But the lore said, they're not truly, and that's the important word, they're not truly the living dead. They were in this weird cusp place where they acted and were used as undead as far as the rules were concerned. But in terms of the lore, they were still kind of living. But the books kept on saying, not really. And it really fucking bugged me because I had a living army. That was the whole conceit of my army. It looked stupid. It was bright purple and bright yellow with bones all over the place. But they fucked with my shit, so I sold my army. And believe it or not, it sold for a lot of money because it was painted relatively well, for all it looks stupid. And I had a pretty big army. It was completely metal army as well, so it was very heavy to carry around in those days. I had a carrying case. I went over to a local con and I sold that off. But my army, come 6th edition, came to an end. because the undead rule was added. And that undead rule lasts all the way through into, is it 6th or 7th? 6th edition is where, that 7th edition is where the rules added, 8th edition is where they consolidate it. I'm getting my editions wrong there just to make sure I get it the right way around.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure 6th edition still got fear and their scavenger rule because they move around in packs. And then 7th, I'm just going through my head as I was using the army. So 7th edition where they totally screw with my shit. So 7th edition is 2008. I'm writing for Warhammer at this point.
Yeah, 6th edition. Alive!
Yeah, totally. Alive, 7th edition, dead. And they quite literally state, to quote it, though not truly the living dead, but still part of the undead army, they're sort of undead. And they changed the lore. And they changed how the army sits. Then we finally arrive at the very last edition, which is 8th edition. And in 8th edition, this is the one that is basically the core edition for everyone. And they copy-paste. And they copy-paste over, and in the copy-paste, they then use the same language. They're not truly undead. But they're not living either. They're in this weird twilight zone. They're in this sort of dawning of one place to the next. They are sort of alive and sort of not. They are consuming the dead. They are associated with the undead, but they're still sort of alive too. But as far as the rules are concerned, they are undead. And that, from my perspective, sucked because my army was ruined. Which is why I say today, I'm taking a very different route. I'm taking a personal route for my intro. And the personal route is that I used to love ghouls. I adored ghouls. And then I stopped loving ghouls because I no longer had a ghoul army to the same extent because they changed what ghouls were. And that's going to be a core component of our discussion today. Exactly what is a ghoul and why are they the way they are? Because the lore is relatively clear. They're cannibals. And through their cannibalistic acts, they have become ghouls. And it's also quite clear that there are communities that have fallen into ghouldom, where they were just normal humans who have, for various reasons of poverty or horror, or perhaps the influence of dark powers or whatever else it might be, turned to cannibalism. And through doing so, the community falls into this state of ghouldom. And ghouls start spreading out from this place. These sort of not quite undead that have formed without necessarily being related to any of the other ghouls elsewhere. It has no longer been a condition that was originally created in, well, it's still a condition that was originally created in Nagashazar, and spread out from there, but it is no longer located there. You don't need to be related to previous ghouls. Any human can become a ghoul, apparently.
Yeah.
And that is fascinating because it ultimately asks the question of why? What is going on here? And I think that's going to form a core component of our discussions because it's interesting. What are the ghouls? Why are they the way they are? What has become of them? We'll also be discussing the Strigoi, the vampire bloodline that's closely associated with the ghouls, and why they're associated with them, because there's a pretty damn fine story there. Now, from my perspective, I don't give a fuck, because I want my necromancer army with loads of ghouls, and I can't do that. So there's always going to be a slight undercurrent throughout this entire stream of bullshit. You've ruined my army.
So I want to add, just so I both agree and disagree with Andy at the same time. In that one of the things I find interesting about the 7th edition change is that it's funny that from like a lore perspective, I very much agree, and we'll talk about why specifically, that ghouls are not, to call them truly alive is a lie. But they're also not dead. Like they're definitely unconditionally not dead. They're not undead. They're just kind of these weird guys. We'll talk about that.
Oh no, in 8th edition, they are absolutely undead as far as the rules are concerned.
Yeah, but so are necromancers. Necromancers also have the undead rule. And here's the thing: it's because they got lazy. The rules are lazy. I refuse to apply that to a lore. I refuse to apply that.
I think that's fair. The important line though is sadly the one they copy pasted over from 7th, which is though not truly undead, meaning that they are partially so. And I dislike that because I really feel that they are not undead on a personal level, because my army was basically its entire conceit, an undead army with no undead in it. And I really like that as an idea, and still to this day do. But Games Workshop have absolutely changed it, no matter what my preferences are, because that, though not truly undead copy paste, kind of ruins it. And
I mean, he does talk
I
about
think-
them still having kids, though. Like, so
Yeah,
they can have offspring. So
they
they're
can have
alive.
offspring. Yes, absolutely. They're in the cusp point. They're in the twilight zone.
Yeah.
They are not alive and they're not unalive. Parts of their flesh has become like almost necrotic. They are no longer properly living.
Yeah, I do like the way that Liber Necris tackles this, but we'll get into that. All right, Prince Teclis. Elves together is passive aggressive. Elves asked to deal with the human problem is aggressively passive. Well, I mean, to be fair, when you live for like practically ever, like, you know, why rush?
I would say, Teclis, that they often deal with the human problem in the best way possible by putting it down. There are multiple examples of the elves just going, not to war, they just go over and sack places when they get a little bit too big. This happens to Marienburg, for example. Marienburg got completely sacked by Aisling. He just comes in and wipes the place clean. And this happens multiple times with the elves. The elves are pretty much world police all the way up to almost the very last points in the modern era.
It's like, listen, I'm just saying, it's probably not a coincidence that humanity only really got to start rising up after the elves got chased out of the old world.
I'll go further. Even during that entire period, the elves still consider themselves world police. They rule the seas, for example. They are, the high elves in particular, they are a domineering external world power that controls other nations through politics and through war, and do it again and again and again. High elves are not good guys. But when we take a look at what Finubar did, he completely changes how the elves interact with the rest of the world, which allows for the rise of the old world as we understand it today.
Yep. Killsteel, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Killsteel. That's enormously generous. Thanks.
Happy birthday, Andy. I just ordered Dark Deeds.
DJ!
I had started Warhammer Fantasy 4th edition to 8th edition. I also had a large undead army. My very first named character was Krell. But those ghouls were always mad, insane, and crazy.
They totally were. I loved playing with my ghoul army. It was so fun, particularly in 4th edition because it was uncontrollable. The number of times I'd win combat, I'd be ahead, and suddenly my units just draw to a halt because they go into the feeding frenzy, and then others start withdrawing around them so they can try and control the battle. But I have lots of ghouls, so they have nowhere to go. They're going to have to get close to me at some point. Yeah, totally. So it was a fun army. Really enjoyed it.
Morty Crescent, thank you for the cheer. Says Ghouls in Mordheim, the only undead unit that could get experience because they weren't really dead.
Yeah, because they're not really dead. They're not.
Yeah. Mr. Pig, wait, so they were purple and bright yellow. That is literally the purple people eaters.
Yeah, the purple, yeah, quite. I really wish that I'd made that joke at the time because it would have made so much more sense of my army. I like to I'm going to now retroactively claim that's why I did that.
Conscious influence.
It really wasn't what I did. Although I love that song, Giant Purple People Eaters. Yeah. Totally.
Downman 95. At what point in Warhammer history did the ghouls become the master musicians of Swedish metal band Ghost? It's a long story, one we don't have time for today, unfortunately, but you know, it's there somewhere. Darius Rose, I asked Andy about this last stream, but still fun. What creature do you find the most scary and disturbing? For me, the Mourngul and Gorger are the scariest, and anything Nurgle is disturbing due to it being a chaos god I'd fall to.
So yeah, I'll give my answer as because I gave my answer in another stream. That was in the Ask Me Anything the other day, and I gave because it was most disturbing as it was pitched in that one, and I went really relatively basic with my answer to it, and it was a Daemonette, because the Daemonettes, out of all of the things in the Warhammer world, speak to the core needs of humanity, and if they were played as well as they are described, humanity would have fallen ages ago, because the core of what they offer, humans need and will just go for. They are disturbing as fuck. And for me, they were definitely perhaps for some unexpected choice, but yeah, just the Daemonettes, because they are effective.
I'm gonna cheat because I'm gonna pull up a creature you've probably never heard of, because it's from it's from second edition Wolfrup.
That's
which
not
had
cheating.
I consider it cheating because most people.
That's the whole point of Lorebeards.
I would say the most disturbing creature to me, like if I saw it in the universe, I would quite literally just try to end myself as fast as possible, as far away as possible, would be what's called an amalgamation beast. And an amalgamation beast it's basically like a bunch of people's souls and emotional bleh that all get kind of congregated together and it gets spat out by the realm of chaos up in the north. So it's this big undulating pile of flesh covered in like faces and parts of people that drags itself around. And the thing that's said to be truly horrible about it is it's hypothesized by scholars within the universe that should a amalgamation beast kill you, it will devour you and you become a part of it. So you don't actually get the privilege of dying. Your soul stuff gets caught up in this etheric entity. If you're aware of the SCP called When Day Breaks, it's very similar to that concept. It's bad. It's a bad, ugly, horrifying creature that the sooner it gets killed and shunted back to the realm of chaos, the better. You do not want that thing anywhere near you.
But then, all Daemonates claim your souls too. And there's so many more of them.
True, but at least you might get to enjoy a piece of that experience before you end up in the shitty.
That's why they're disturbing. Because they are actually alluring. And that's why that for me, if Daemonates are played to type, they are arguably they're too powerful.
I see your argument. I just don't necessarily consider that to be as bad of a concept.
No. Everyone's got their own.
For my personal fears.
Yeah, totally.
Mornington Crescent. Dead bodies attract a particular wind. Cannibals eat those, absorb wind in bulk, and then continue to attract it. We'll talk about it.
That's definitely a potential for the conversation. Although
that's a theory, but
it's
only humans.
Yeah, there is parts of the whole thing that undermine that as a core issue, and I think by the end of the stream, we're going to almost certainly have to come up with some form of conclusion as to why it's only humans. Yep,
let's create Total War and Sotek got me into Warhammer Fantasy, and it's my favorite setting now. I've read all the books.
Wow,
so I'm going to say, I love that for you. I bet that's not as true as you hope it is. Because there are so many that are very difficult to find. Reichsguard, my beloved. Delmar and Seabricht are always with me. Special Karl Franz episode, when? Bring me to my men. That might be fun to do this upcoming year. A Karl Franz episode could be...
Karl Franz episode would be certainly one, because he's a fascinating character who has changed significantly through the editions.
Yeah, fun fact is that Karl Franz is kind of sort of the start of why Lorebeards became this version of Lorebeards became what it is. Was the first time we ever had Andy on just to talk about general stuff. Karl Franz came up, and that made me realize how dramatic the shift was. Because if you aren't exposed to someone who was around for the older stuff, you just won't know. You just won't. GW is not particularly good about releasing here's an anthology that covers how much this character has changed. They don't like when people really talk about it. I don't know if they don't like it. They just don't bother.
That's a bit strong. It's not a part of what's important to their current game.
Yeah. So talking about that was kind of the big thing that I was like, oh, this should be a regular thing, because there's information here that I'm just never going to be able to dig up. Because getting a hold of all those books is pretty much impossible if you're going all the way back to 3rd edition. And even if you are going to do it, it's horrifically expensive, and you still aren't going to have the cultural relevance to it.
You didn't work your way through with a purple and
Well, it's not
army.
We were talking about it where Andy has the context of how people were reacting on old internet forums. About the changes to Karl Franz. And to me, that's I would never be able to know that information without Andy bringing it up. So
there was no internet forums when the first major complaints were hitting.
Sorry, when they were mailing it in, I guess.
Letter pages and the first mailing list. Oh gods, the first Warhammer mailing list. They were mental. That's going back.
Diamond 95, off topic question. If you wanted to have a Warhammer story not interfere with modern characters' lore, so set in the past, but you want to use some units/concepts that are tied with modern characters or said to have been invented recently, how do you resolve the issue?
So I'll bring up a quick one on this. We discussed it briefly in the Ask Me Anything as well, because you brought it up there too. And my answer still stands that I said there, so I won't repeat it in any length. I'll just simply say you've got a choice. And your choice is you either use the unit that you wish to use, which is a modern unit, and accept that you're going to end up probably contradicting lore because you don't necessarily know it all, or you go into the past where the lore is much more amorphous and that unit may no longer exist because it's a relatively new invention, and you just create something that is similar to the thing that you want to use, and perhaps even say that the unit that comes later is related to that thing that came before it that you've just built. But ultimately, it's up to you and how you wish to do your world building. And whenever you start world building in Warhammer, always be aware you're going to start creating contradictions, even if you don't intend to, because you'll never know all the lore, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah, I'm gonna be very blunt with you, actually, of that Warhammer contradicts the fuck out of itself. Trying to avoid doing that, you're just shooting yourself in the face for no reason. Just have fun. Just have fun. Don't worry about it.
I mean, I'll give a single example from my own games. Lawhammer massively contradicts everything. But that's part of the fun, because somebody encounters a thing and says, that can't be true. That can't be true because I know the lore. But that's part of the fun of personal role-playing games, because you don't need to take the extended lore as it is and accept it as truth. Because trust me, the writers don't. When I was writing, never really worried about, is the story I'm doing contradicting that other thing? I would perhaps worry about, can I make it work? And
like we're literally going through that right now with the old world.
But when I wrote Kislev, for example, I was in a position where I had to decide about the bits of Kislev I was going to keep and the bits I was going to get rid of. Because sometimes you have to do that as a writer. And the writers do that, and then the next generation look at that book and they say, hey, look at all this stuff here. I don't want to contradict that. And I'm like, I just made that up. You can contradict it all you want. You make your own stories. So at home, make your own stories without issue. But if you do end up working on the game professionally, please at least do your reading. So if you do make a contradiction, you do it for a reason.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. Is like, you should try and learn as much as you can on the subject so that you can pull the best parts. And you know what you're discarding. That way, if someone goes, hey, why is this thing not a part of it? You have an answer instead of just going, oh.
Just to call up on you there. Don't be sorry. The answer still stands there, so you can watch it at your leisure. It was quite a fun question, actually. I really liked it because I had a bit of a roundabouty chat about different ways you could tackle it.
Yep, Necromancer Cobalt. So horrors are related. What about Morghuls? We will talk about Morghuls today because they are related to this in an interesting way that you're going to go, well, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to go, but it kind of does, but it also makes it really, really spooky. We'll get into it. Don't worry, we'll get into it.
Yep.
Watchdog 3079. Could the sudden mass ghoul spawning of fringe disconnected villages point to the existence of Wendigos or equivalent being spirits of desperation? So we will talk about that. That has more to do with what a Morghuls is, which we'll get into. But ghouls do play a part of that. I promise we're going to get into all this in a minute. Downman, the amalgamation beast seems somewhat similar to Brandon Sanderson's Mist Wraiths and or the Inuit Tupilak monster, though both are a bit more physical than Soul. I don't know what those are, so all I'm going to say is sure. Unfortunately. Necromancer Cobalt, slightly off topic related to my last chat. It's kind of neat that Games Workshop basically made Wendigos, but had the restraint not to use the name. Glad to see. A very rare thing for them.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Yeah. Honestly, like there are two creatures that would very accurately, I think, in like kind of a little bit of a more accurate way or a bit more of a cultural zeitgeist way relate to what is known as a Wendigo. And Games Workshop did not call either of them that, which I say good on them. Good on them. Somehow they avoided that really, really common pitfall. All right, so ghouls. I think the best place to probably start with this is to probably start with Nagash.
Nagash seems to be the obvious choice.
Yeah. So for those unaware, one thing that adds to the mystery of what we're about to discuss is that according to every source I could find, including like the deeper roleplay sources, some of the additional books, the various Black Library books, there is a definitive time where ghouls did not exist,
Yep.
and then they did exist. So there is a emergence event, which is ultimately Nagash.
Yes.
So to kind of TLDR us through it, so we can actually just spend the next 2 hours talking about the actual ghouls, not worrying too much about Nagash. Nagash does all his Nagashi shit, and after he gets kicked out of Kimmery, he's defeated by the combined armies of the 7 Priest Kings. He gets chased out, and he runs over to Cripple Peak, where he founds Nagashazar. And there are slight variations in the story, but the important thing is he gets to the Sour Sea, he drinks out of the Sour Sea, realizes there's something cool going on there. He goes into Cripple Peak, finds the Warpstone, giant Warpstone meteor, and he starts building his fortress. Now, most versions of the story essentially go like Nagash basically spends a good while, like many, many years, meditating and consuming Warpstone and doing all the stuff, and he starts practicing and getting better at the art of necromancy. And the essential thing is that there were already large groups of people that lived around the Sour Sea. And these people start having to deal with Nagash. And now, in some versions of the story that are a little newer-ish, but they're also from an old worlder perspective, which I think is very important. It says that these people were horrible, evil-hearted people that consumed the dead of others. And because of their wickedness, they were drawn to Nagash, which I say that's very hilarious bullshit and definitely from a very imperial perspective. In the other sources, most notably the Liber Necris, it tells a much more interesting story, which is that these were the native people of these lands, and Nagash comes down to them to basically experiment on their dead. And they try to respond against him and just get torn to pieces. Like, it's ugly. Because they're mere mortals. What are they going to do against fucking Nagash? And after a while, they basically have a choice of they can either completely and utterly abandon their homes and flee into the Dark Lands, which sucks, or the Badlands, which sucks, because there's greenskins everywhere. They could try and fight Nagash and die instantly because he can literally say a single word and just rip their souls out. Or they basically start worshiping this new horrifying entity as a god and trying to appease it. And many of them go with the third option. They try to appease Nagash. And Nagash, for all of his so-called being above human stuff, is a very arrogant entity, and he enjoys being worshipped. He won't admit it to himself, but he does enjoy it. And so he is willing...
I think, just to interrupt, just to make sure that we get this point for a later stream.
Yeah.
I think there's more than simply enjoyment here, because Nagash clearly and definitely has goals for godhood. And
yeah, that's fair.
And at this point, you're seeing the first burgeoning realizations of what was the previous version of him, the Tomb King, that you could... It's not the Tomb King, really, because they're not
the Priest King, yeah.
The Priest King would be better. That was worshipped as a divine representation of the gods, and moving from being a representation to being a god. He very much is that arrogant figure who wishes to be at the center of adulation, but I think there's definitely a why there. But that's not for this stream. Let's just hold that one for a later day.
Yeah, so these people start worshiping Nagash, and it becomes like multi-generational because Nagash is here for a while, and they become what's known as the Nagashi, which are a nation, a genuine, like, this was not like just a couple tribes. This turns into a full nation covering almost the entirety of the coastline around the Sour Sea, worshiping Nagash as their god. And they, after a time, it's, although, you know, a lot of them do fear him, many of them are fanatically loyal to him. And Nagash is very deeply revered. Their dead are, you know, when people die, their dead are given to Nagash. He sends the dead into the mines to work the cursed pit and everything. But these people work for him. And they worship him. They do their own stuff. And Nagash doesn't destroy them. He kind of just, he rules over them and kind of lets them be there on the side. Now, the really depressing version of the story, which I love very deeply, and I'm going to tell it to you because it's the version I like, is that as Nagash starts to build up in power and he's mining more and more warpstone, all of that warpstone dust starts to affect the area. The warpstone's dust gets into the plants, animals start eating the plants, it starts getting into the animals, people are eating the animals, they're drinking the water, it's getting down into like the groundwater, so everything's infected with warpstone dust, and the people begin to sicken and die. They start to have more, mutations. People are getting sick. Children are being born with severe issues and all this. And Nagash looks over at it and goes, that's a bit of a problem. Because although I tell myself I don't care about these people, they are very useful to me. And in this form, this is problematic. Of that, he sees this country starting to fracture. Demons are starting to manifest. The dead aren't resting easily. They're like unquiet spirits. And it mentions that the people are afraid, they're exhausted, they're so sickening. So Nagash decides to come up with a solution. And Nagash unleashes what is known as the Dark Feast, where he says he goes to the most afflicted of the villages, and he personally presides over a great ritual where he commands them to eat the weakest still living and prisoners taken from like enemy nations and stuff, and oversees them having banquets where they have to consume the still living or very recently dead flesh of other humans. And
so this sucks.
Yeah,
I mean, this sucks. I mean, Nagash. Let's boil it down. There's various versions of the story, and Sotek's spot on here because different versions have they've waxed lyrical, often not more than a sentence or two as they do so, describing slightly different variations here. But the core of it is there were humans in and around Cripple Peak. These humans came to worship Nagash as a god. The great mining works that happen at Cripple Peak and the enormous quantities of dark magic and necromancy that are being used in this area warp and change the people around it. And we get our first ghouls. The first ghouls are initiated by Nagash into the Dark Feast. The Dark Feast is variously discussed, but loosely speaking, it is eating humans, eating other people. And it's a great celebration that involves Nagash. It's part of your worship to Nagash. And this, slowly but surely, over the course of generations, turned all of the Nagashi, all of the various tribesfolk around this area, into our first ghouls. And these ghouls never leave the area. So we are talking several thousand years ago, and when we move up to the modern era and the eventual blowing up of the world, they are still there as a massive ghoul nation, effectively. The entire area is predated by cannibalistic tribesmen ghouls who still worship Nagash in the area. And still with whatever is left of their feeble minds, because as they devolve into ghouldom, their minds slip. They become bestial entities. Far more related with, if you want to associate it with one of the winds, Gur. Very closely related to Gur particularly. Because they become savage and monstrous. Their minds become secondary. They become atavistic. They move from being creatures with high-level thinking, which is more Heish, the wind of intellect, and they move away from that to just responding to their needs, which is eating, fucking, sleeping, and little else. They're animals, and these animals still revere and absolutely fear Nagash. But the problem is, and it's the big one, that these ghouls and everything that's been created, and the things do spread from here. It appears that their creation starts something.
Yeah, so one thing I want to add before we go on to this next topic, which is when things are going to start getting weird, but really, really interesting, is that, so ghouls are, the thing that's fascinating about them is that they are, like Andy said, they are humans that basically do not have a very good sense of, it's often described as they don't have a sense of self. Most ghouls don't have names. They don't speak language. They are, you could almost describe them as humans that are missing parts of their souls, which is how they're described in the Liber Necris, is that they are humans that have literally lost the concept of identity, and they have lost the concept of having a name, which from a Liber Necris standpoint, a name is kind of like a part of your soul. It's a huge importantly part of what you are.
Yeah, and you lose your sense of self which is the best way to imagine it. The soul in the Liber Necris is split into several parts, each of which have got a name. And losing your name is akin to losing yourself. And as Nagash is a master of that particular type of magic, because the Liber Necris is all involved with the old magics of Nekara, it does seem very likely that this is something that Nagash did.
Yeah, because like Andy was alluding to in an excellent pivot that I then interrupted because I'm dumb, is that ghouls somehow became a worldwide phenomenon. Which, if you're listening, you may go, oh, well, maybe they spread. No, they very explicitly didn't. The ghouls of the Sour Sea, the Nagashi, they're still there. They didn't leave. They didn't flee when Nagash died and when the Skaven took over. They just were like a nightmarish thing that stayed there. When Nagash came back, they surged up again. They worship Nagash there to this day. It's why visiting Nagashazar is fucking impossible, because just getting to the fortress is a nightmare of going through the ghoul-haunted mountains. But yet in the Empire, in Bretonnia and Telea, as far
which
as...
don't really exist at this point, it's worth noting.
Yeah, in the depths of the Southlands, even in the like the modern era and stuff, ghouls pop up. They spontaneously will be created by people engaging in cannibalism. Now, and what's interesting is you may go, oh, well, maybe they're like people performing a dark ritual, or they're bad people who like fall into cannibalism and they just stick with it. No. The lore explicitly says that sometimes a bad winter comes, or there's no harvest because of disease or war or famine, and people get desperate. Like, really, I mean, think about our world, our real world, of that. There have been times where people get really fucking desperate, and there's a horrible tragedy where it's, okay, these people are dead. The practical thing to do, it's not moral, it's just practical, is to eat what we have available, which is these dead people, and feel really bad about it, unfortunately. And then hopefully you survive long enough to get out of that circumstance and then move on and get therapy and try not to never think about it ever again. And
not so in Warhammer.
And in Warhammer, no, if you do it, now it's not necessarily guaranteed, but it seems like it's very difficult to avoid devolving into ghoulship.
You're basically moving into willpower test territory, or you're turning into a ghoul. And I think that that's probably the next thing that we need to consider. What happens? Because ghouls aren't human anymore. Ghouls are expressly different. They are, if you want to view it in very blunt Warhammer terms, mutants. They mutate. They become something different. Where beforehand, they are your living, breathing, standard humans. They become hunched over. Their spines ripple out. They typically, but not always, lose most of their hair. Tufts of fur can pop up in them across their spine, down their backs. Their claws grow, and regardless of where you are or what those ghouls do, they always have poisoned attacks. And different versions of the lore give you different answers here. If we go to the original version, they are literally seeping poison. If you go with the later one, it's all grave filth, and it's more the cat answer, as in there's lots of dirt involved with it. Regardless of what the answer is, it doesn't matter. Their claws scraping across you is enough to kill you. It's more than simply poison. It's more than simply your standard, I've got an infection thing going on. They are poisoned attacks. So they are going to kill you if they get into you, and eat you alive if they possibly can. They become loping, monstrous, and almost mindless creatures, but they still ape life to a degree. They wear rags, they use basic tools. They're not so much beasts, they're not beasts, they're atavistic humans, as in they are humans scaled right back, their intellect pulled right out. They are quite literally humans who have lost their sense of self. If you want to be as simple as you can, they have taken a human, they have perverted it with some form of dark magic, which has caused mutation, and then they have taken out a portion of the soul, leaving them no longer quite living, because they have lost a chunk of their soul. They're no longer alive, and indeed the rules represent that, as we discussed, to become undead as far as the rules are concerned, but they're still living. They can still procreate, they can still have children. They still rear their children. They don't just eat their children. They tend to eat other
they
humans.
have communities.
They have communities, and these communities, particularly when they form in unexpected areas, say, for example, in a corner of the empire, which has, during a poor winter, turned to cannibalism, they can often not just turn into ghoul communities, they can turn into ghoul swarms, where they then swarm outwards and effectively spread. Now, this might sound relatively familiar to anyone that knows anything about the undead. A lot of undead...
Fast zombies. Yeah.
Yeah, they're fast zombies. They're very much fast zombies. And if you've ever watched any fast zombie lore, this is what the ghouls do. But this is almost classic undead stuff, in that several factions of the undead, vampires, for example, basically spread as they go. It's how they're created. They take the living and they turn the living into something else, which is why I think it's fair to say this is not accidental. You don't lose a portion of your soul simply by eating dead stuff. If you did, everyone that did it, ogres, would do this. And they don't. So we have something that requires an answer, and there is an obvious one.
Yeah. So something I want to add, to add levels of complexity here for people kind of enjoying us going through the storyline. We'll get caught up in super chats after this. Is I want to talk very briefly about what is a Morgul, because a Morgul adds an interesting flavor to the discussion. So Morguls are these huge, nightmarish, ghost-like creatures that are much more heavily associated with a classic. If you get into like the actual stories, more of what a Wendigos are actually based on, where they are humans that have consumed the flesh of other humans up in the, like, they get caught in blizzards or up in the mountains, but it's always where there's cold. It has to be very, very, very cold. And these are people who, out of desperation and horrible bitterness, consume the dead of other people. Now, what's interesting about the Morgul lore is it specifically points out that a person that's going to turn into a Morgul has to be in a very particular emotional state. They have to be full of bitterness, hatred. They have to be full of like a really intense negative emotion, and they will consume the dead in desperation. But as they do so, they'll notice like a wound on their stomach, and it won't heal. And as the days drag on and their mind kind of starts to deteriorate, the wound gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they die. And when they die, their body is kind of ripped in half, essentially, and the top half turns into what we know as a Morgul, which is a nightmarish spirit of frost, essentially, of like the really consuming, ugly parts of winter. And they're these horrible, bloodthirsty monsters that are very big. They pull themselves around on their arms. They move really fast. They're borderline invisible, which is horrifying. But they're spirits that try and consume things to sate a hunger that they never can. They are literally the spirit of ravenous, endless hunger. But they're true undead, which is very different.
Very different. They are. I mean, spirit is a good word, but spirit has other connotations aside Warhammer. They're ghosts.
Yeah. They're ethereal entities.
They are undead. Actual proper undead, unlike the ghouls. The ghouls are humans that have devolved into something else. And there is an obvious answer what has occurred here. But I think we'll get onto that a little bit after. I think we should probably super chat first. Because there's some good stuff to discuss here.
Yeah, I want to kind of have fun a bit, leaving y'all a little bit of suspense and squashing down little theories before we get into the core thing. Yeah, because I'm curious if Andy's answer is going to be the same as mine, which I'm looking forward to.
My answer is the obvious one.
Really you say obvious, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's obvious. Let's see. We were here. Wooninyan is getting Dark Deeds through the pre-order link the best. I'd like to get it for Christmas in a way that supports my favorite podcast.
Okay, so the pre-order link is the same as any of the other links that are out there. The pre-order link is actually the same as the order link. It's the actual same one. It goes to Modiphius. And it's either Modiphius over in the UK or Modiphius in the US. So you can order for one of those two hubs. I don't there is no, get a link and we get a percentage thing or whatever. It's just literally everything goes to Modiphius. But I have a deal with Modiphius where they then send us money after, so that's great. So it makes very little difference. So the best place is just order it directly from Modiphius or your local friendly game store if you wish to support them.
Yeah, I was gonna say it actually. If you want to play like kind of 5D chess, it could be best to go to your local game store and be like, hey, this is a really cool game. Could y'all order several copies of this and I could buy one of them and like maybe get other people to try and buy some. That way they buy multiple copies.
That would be
Just
amazing. If we can just get it into more stores, that would be great. But the stores won't stock it unless people are asking for it. Just as a small thing, there are literally hundreds of games coming out every single month just now in the board game side, or paints, or bits for games, or whatever. So shops have a hard time choosing which one's taken and which one's not. So
so talk to your local hobby store.
Driven by their customers. So speak to your local stores and see if they can order Dark Deeds in.
Thoth's Apprentice. So if Dar in blood causes ghoulification, not necessarily the case, we'll talk about it. Why doesn't eating animals make ghouls? Great question. Do they not accumulate enough magic in their lifetimes compared? Because you're right. If something's corrupted by enough, like let's say dark magic or warpstone, it could cause you to turn into a mutant, but not a ghoul, which is very specific.
Okay, so your Thoth's Apprentice, you're spot on. What we have here in terms of your question is spot on picking up an issue, and that is it clearly isn't the consumption of corpses that causes ghoulification. There is a specific ritual that has to come about before it occurs. It involves a human consuming the flesh of another human, and it probably involves some form of mindset on top of that. If the mindset is particularly far and broken, that mindset will create ghosts, spirits of hunger. But if it's not so broken, it's sitting somewhere else, that mindset results in a ghoul. And if that is the case, you then have the question of why. And I think there is a good answer for that.
I don't know, man. Warpstone dust. Warhammer microplastic. Yeah, unironically, reading about Warpstone dust is really eerie nowadays because it kind of feels like Games Workshop looking into the future because it's very similar to our modern day concerns about microplastics.
If I was going to be writing anything just now, I would be definitely using it as a reflection of that, and potentially even using some of those fears to reflect into the writing, because Warhammer's often at its best when it's doing the sci-fi thing, where it's taking a look at the current world and it's retelling stories of the human condition.
Yeah, or you got like fish with too much mercury in them, and yeah. Sopranza, just watched the Luzerman City stream. Thank you for making the effort of correct pronunciation. We try. We often fail, but we try. Well, I often fail. I love hearing Andy's Scottish accent for Elven stuff. Yeah, it is fun, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I can't help my accent. I am who I am.
Black Dracula, are Gorgers ogre ghouls? So this is also a great question.
I'm looking forward to this one because I agree. Great question.
Yeah, so let's dive into this just a little bit real quick. So Gorgers, for those that don't know, when ogre tribes have offspring, when children are born into the tribe, they are presented before a butcher. And if the child is viewed to be too weak or sickly or skinny, ogre tribes have a very pragmatic view towards life, and they will often look at a young and say, this one doesn't look like it's going to make it, which is kind of how actual nature is. Where, like, birds or like many creatures will have a baby, and if they look at the baby and say, oh, nope, this one's not going to make it, they'll just abandon it. What ogres do is they take the baby and they put it down in the tunnels beneath the mountains of Morn, and they have a cave where they like put refuse and stuff, and they put the baby in there and they seal the tunnel. And the baby will live or it'll die. And if it lives, the baby will start wandering around and it will adapt to this new environment where there's no light, and there's often considerable amounts of warpstone dust. Warpstone in the caverns beneath the mountains of Morn, and the baby will kind of just eat whatever little critters it can catch and stuff and avoid bigger things, and it will eventually kind of mutate into a Gorger, which are horrible, big, sinewy ogres that can, like, how like a cat can fit through any hole their head can fit through? A Gorger is the exact same way, where if its head can fit, it can move its bones around in such a way that it can squeeze through tiny, tiny holes, which is fucking terrifying. But they are creatures of endless hunger. But they are similar to ghouls in that they are more devolved mentally in that sense. but they are not like ghouls in that we don't have any evidence that they have that same relationship with like dark magic. They don't have the poisonous claws. They don't seem to have offspring that have the exact same affliction they do because they don't have offspring. They're similar, but they're very distinct for the ogres. They have a connection to the Great Maw, which we see through Scrag the Slaughterer. So would I say that you could call them ogre ghouls? Yeah, I'd say that's not an unfair description, but there is still a difference because they're also not spontaneous. It's a specific method that creates them. Whereas, which is a butcher doing something specific to a baby. It has to be a baby. If it's just an ogre that gets hungry as an adult, it won't become a gorger. They'll just die. It has to be a baby.
So, they are not.
Yeah.
I am going to call this out specifically because ghouldom is a specific result for humanity. Gorgers is a similar result that comes about because of a butcher. I'm going to argue that it is not just simply they're cast down. There is almost certainly some form of maw-related nonsense going on here, particularly because the butchers are involved. This appears to be something that is done to them in a hope that these sickly, weak things will survive and one fashion or other cast them out away to become. They are going through a different process that ends up with a similar result. And yes, I absolutely think you could call them ogre ghouls, and I think that they're definitely doing something similar, but they are not turning up because of the same results. They are not becoming what they are. They're gorgers because of why the ghouls become ghouls. Different situation, similar outcome.
Yep. Battlefoot, from what Andy said yesterday, it sounds a lot like ghouls are infested with Gur, like all the way through the bone and can infect others. We will talk about that. That is something that Age of Sigmar actually deliberately played with during the Age of the Beast, which was 3rd edition Age of Sigmar, which is when Gur went crazy.
And in this particular instance, if you're looking at the magical aspect of it, that does then suggest that we have something that is making a magical imposition onto this particular situation. And again, because of that, we have ourselves some relatively obvious conclusions that we can draw.
Yep. Morning Crescent, can we get a 32 days later story about ghouls swarming a small market town in Venture and defend it? So, if you're just a random note, if you want to have fun with this in a roleplay campaign, and you want to make it canonical, in the 8th edition Ghoul entry, they added a really fun note that isn't in any of the previous editions, which says that in Stirland in 2512, they had their 3rd year in a row of failed crops, and it was bad. And due to the mass starvation, several villages in desperation turned to cannibalism, and it resulted in what Andy talked about earlier, a ghoul swarm, bad one, where a whole bunch of villages, people turned to ghouls, and they started spreading and going, like, just eating people, which caused more ghouls, and it just spread, and it got so bad that Stirland sent out their knightly orders to fight, and there was a giant battle where the knights had to push them all the way back to these villages, and they burned everything. And this was in 2512, very recent.
So, and also, if you're playing the roleplay game, that is the year that the roleplay game is set. If you're playing 4th edition, it's set in that, and it's if you play the Enemy Within campaign, for example, it's set before that event because it sort of happens in the late winter. So it's basically to come if you're playing the Enemy Within campaign. It's something that will occur in the winter of that year.
Which, so if you're playing like if you're in like Death on the Reich, that could be a great part.
Absolutely,
to show up.
Yeah, totally. So if you're going by the Lawhammer timeline, that's about 2.5 months away.
Woohoo! Bible Culking, since Sotek brought up about some people having resort to cannibalism in hard times, is there a group of ghouls based on the Donner Party? Probably.
I mean, sure. I mean, there's nothing that are specifically set in the setting that I'm aware of, but it wouldn't surprise me if someone decided to do it.
Yeah, that would not be surprising at all. Especially because, I mean, ghouls show up everywhere. They, like we said, like, they show up in Lustria, they show up in the Southlands, they show up literally everywhere. Wonder Alpha, what if, instead of losing soul, they get too much soul from the corpse eating, that body/soul connection, and lose their sense of self?
that makes for an interesting conclusion. It is, in terms of the lore and how the soul works, not the case as they suggest it. But you could definitely suggest that the impact of one soul against the other could be causing some sort of erosion on that side. But it definitely seems to be an erosion, not an addition.
Yeah, I would say Wonder Alpha. That would be a really cool theory for like an in-universe Shaiish wizard or priest of Mor to have that they're kind of investigating. That could be a really, really fun character idea.
Yeah,
gentlemen. Wait, if Morghuls are ghosts, why are they depicted mostly as physical entities? In this sense, are they a bit more like demons such the war aspect? So the artwork often kind of runs into an issue where, like, how do you depict something that's supposed to be like see-through and ethereal in a fun way? Morghuls, if you actually like read the actual Monstrous Arcanum depiction, so don't worry about like the Total War thing. If you read the depiction, they're very not physical. Now they can when they attack people, they can make themselves physical enough that they can start to eat something, and it just kind of like goes through and drops out of them. But it specifically talks about how they have the full-on ethereal rule set, and that they are in truth spirits. Now, that doesn't mean that they're like unable to interact with the material plane. They can, because they're that powerful. Because they're like really strong as far as the like. There's a, if you go back and look at second edition like Night's Dark Masters or the Bestiary, there's actually like a really fun like set of like the different kinds of spirits where it's like spirit, specter, ghost, yada 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 yada. That gives like a fun little list of like what separates all of them from each other. But Morghuls are like S plus tier ghostly undead. Probably the worst next
and
to
I'm happy to just loosely summarize your question with a single word answer. Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean,
great.
you know, they're spirits, but can they manifest physically and hurt shit? Absolutely. Is that what demons do? Yes. Is that what Dryads do? Are they spirits? Yes.
Actually, yeah, that's 100%. Yeah, I mean, that is correct. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
Yes, seems fair, but they are 100% ghosts.
Ghouls sound a lot like Dark Souls Hollows. Yes. Minus the dying and coming back part, but yes.
Yeah.
In the sense of like loss of identity and they sort of devolve because of it, 100%.
Yeah, they are not truly undead. And for all I used that to earlier say that means that they're a bit undead, that also means they are 100% alive. They are not truly undead. They've lost a portion of their soul if we go with the Liber Necris version.
Yeah, they have heartbeats, they defecate, they eat.
And that means that through the loss of that, they are no longer as living as the other things are living. And that means that certainly something has changed, but they're definitely not undead. Well, dead. They're sort of undead.
Age of Sigmar has a story that features a Morghuls, which is the Hunger Fiend in the Prince Mesa saga. Is that a good representation? Good representation. I don't know because I haven't read that book yet. I have it sitting on my desk because it's in my to read pile, but I haven't got around to it. So I'm going to say probably, but I will read it soon and I'll let you know. Soapy Muffins, love the stream. Is it possible to re-domesticate a person who's fully become a ghoul? I know if they're in the process, supposedly they can be saved like we see with the character Eric and Crowfiend. So once you're gone, you're gone.
Yeah. There appears to be no way coming back. It's a little bit like once you've lost your soul, you've lost your soul. Something's changed. You've mutated. You become something different. In the same way that there's no way to come back from mutation, there's no way to come back from this. But I will now say that just because we say that doesn't mean that there's no way of doing it. There will be stories of individuals who have done so. For example, the hags up in Kislev are known for being able to take mutants and in some circumstances removing their mutations, something that should be impossible. So there are always going to be in one corner of the Warhammer world somewhere, someone doing the impossible because it's a magical world where magical things happen. So the answer to this is no, but...
Yeah, and what I'll add on to that is, could your character in the roleplay be someone that's obsessed with their brother chained down in the basement, feeding him stuff, trying to find a way to save him? 100%. Is it possible through the gods or magic? Probably, depending on how tragic you want your character story to be. But yeah, and in fact, I would even go so far as to say, I would even go very far as to say, I would be more than willing to bet this has led some people down the road of necromancy, of trying to find a way to cure ghouldom. You know, that road to hell is paved with good intentions would very much fit this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Phil, how much flesh does one need to consume in order to become a ghoul? Does that have to be human flesh? It has to be human flesh.
Yeah.
From everything I've ever seen, it must be human. If it's like another creature, it doesn't count.
Yep.
Which is interesting.
And it appears to be a relatively decent chunk. We're not just talking about a tiny sausage or a little thing. We're also not talking about, in some respects, the higher level gastronomy that might be, for example, partaken by Slanesh worshippers and similar, who are noted often for their consumption of strange things, yet have not in any way endangered themselves through this. So there are definitely some aspects to it which suggest that the tone of mindset that you're in makes a difference for how it comes out. If, for example, you are a noble who is doing what he thinks is right, and eating them because they're his tiny little peasants, it doesn't seem to create ghouls in the same way that the peasants down there in their desperation is. So there's something going on there.
Yeah, because that's the other side of it, is while not all cannibalism, some cannibalism can lead to something like a Morgul, which is very different. There are also times where cannibalism just doesn't lead to anything.
Yeah.
Like, there have been people that have eaten other people and they seem to get away scot-free, or they're followers of Korn or Slanesh, who or Cain, like, who do it for religious reasons, and they get away scot-free.
No issues at all. Yeah.
Yeah, there are minor deities, like out in the forests of the Empire, Bretonnier stuff, who are like gods of a particular concept that involves eating human flesh as part of a religious rite, would not turn into ghouls.
Yep, absolutely. And I think this is an important component of understanding the ghoul. The ghoul is not a creature that happens because of cannibalism alone. A ghoul is a creature that happens when particular aspects of cannibalism are brought to the fore. The Dark Feast in particular, and the ritual connotations of that create ghouls. And desperate situations where you are in a poor place also can create ghouls.
Cole Patterson, I love that this is the moral lesson you took away from it. So I can eat all the elf flesh I like. Happy day.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And I think that is an important thing to do. Indeed, over in the Lawhammer streams, at one point, there's a halfling who has a book on how to eat humans.
Yeah. Totally normal. Magladroth, is it possible Nagash's ritual was so powerful it retroactively made the act of cannibalism cause the creation of wild ghouls, hence why they show up? Yes and no. Because obviously, as we talked about, not all cannibalization leads to ghouls, so it can't be that simple. But ghouls as a concept, it can.
It can, in that it could be quite literally a ritual. So it is a set of circumstances that are created according to whomever crafted the original ritual, and we know who crafted it.
Yeah, he basically, in a way, which we'll talk. I think me and Andy are kind of leaning towards the same thing.
I think, but
Nagash intentionally, I would say, added an asterisk onto the laws of reality, which also just shows how bullshit strong he is.
I don't think it's necessarily adds a thing. I think I don't want to say the answer here yet, because we're still a good bit away from the end of the stream, and it's always nice to have our crazy fan versions of the conclusions to make sense of everything near the end. But yes, I have a thing to say.
Yeah, maybe like a recipe to reality is a better way to put it.
Spell, one could almost say.
Like does the transition from human to ghoul happen all at once, or are there stages? No, there are stages, which
slow.
Makes it's slow and horrible.
Horrible, yeah. It's not good.
If the latter, what could stop / reverse the change, add more death, please? So, okay. So I want to get through the rest of these super chats. We will. I strongly think we will answer this in the next segment we're going to go into, which is how I think we're both suggesting what actually causes ghoulification, which means there would be a way to stop the process as long as you're not too far down, accepting divine intervention or yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, I think without going into what the process is specifically, the general thing is over time you mutate into a ghoul, and over time you lose your mind. Over time, your hungers take over, and the need to consume human flesh comes to dominate. And over time, you slowly lose yourself until you no longer are yourself. So
Yes.
We don't really need to say more to answer that specific question, really.
The
It's
one-
a slow, drawn-out, horrific process.
Yeah, the one thing that I'll add that I think for me personally makes ghouls so much worse than mutants, because they, like Andy said, they are in kind of by definition a type of mutant. But what makes them so much worse, in my opinion, is that if two mutants get together and have a child, there's a reasonable chance the child will be totally normal, won't have any mutations. But if ghouls get together and have a kid, it's a ghoul.
Yeah, it's a fixed mutation. Mutant is the easy way to describe it and immediately understand it, but it's not strictly speaking that. It's the creation of a new species. This is an entirely fixed new species in the Warhammer world, and we know who created this species. It was Nagash, and Nagash created a new species in the Warhammer world, and they may create more of themselves.
Almost like a god.
He is literally a god. And as much as we like to dance around it because he had mortal origins, so did Sigmar. They just took different routes towards ascension. Yeah. One of them decided to ascend without ever moving into the realm of the gods. Sigmar literally moves into the realm of the gods. Nagash does not.
Downman, while more ghouls are a bit like Wendigos, they're also similar to the Philippine demon/spirit, the Layak. It's basically a demonic fanged head with trailing entrails that target pregnant women to suck the blood of the baby. Yeah, I've seen those. There's the project, I can't remember the name of the project is, but I have a bookmark. The fan project you can find on Reddit very easily, where a bunch of Southeastern artists and writers have been creating their fan version of Warhammer. Koresh has this as one of the monsters. It's horrifying, ugly ass creature. But yes, Seth 45er. If you are familiar with wuxia fiction, in those stories, there is the practice of cultivation. It's where you live well and meditate, you can become superhuman. Ghouls seem like a dark perversion of this concept. That's a way to look at it.
Yeah, it's certainly a way to look at it.
Yeah. Nils asked this before. Ogres, lizardmen, others cannibalize other without dark. Ghoul becomes what? We'll get into that in just a second.
Yeah, we're going to get into that one, but
specifically
because they're not human.
Yeah,
that's it.
You have to be human.
Yeah,
it's
a human condition. And in many respects, it speaks to their creation and where they came from. And there's other species which largely follow the same role, and it also speaks to their creation. Another species, for example, is vampires. They are pretty much human. And why is that? Because of who made them.
Watchdog, how deadly can a ghoul get? Surprisingly so. They're really nasty.
Especially when we go on to discuss some things that can happen to ghouls, particularly when the Strigoi get involved.
Yeah, so the weakness of the typical ghoul is that they are known for being very cowardly creatures that prefer to eat things that are recently dead. So like if you're alive and you make yourself big and scary and make a lot of noise, they're gonna be like, nah, fuck that, I'm out of here. If there's a lot of them, they will swarm over you and rip you apart because they're not by any means like stupid creatures. They realize they can overwhelm you, but if you put up enough of a fight against them, they will run away. They're ambush predators traditionally.
Yeah, and it's as much as we don't normally dive into the stat side of things for Lorebeards, because stats, what do they even mean? They're balanced for a war game. They're not necessarily a good measure for anything. It is worth noting that stat-wise, they are as capable as fully trained soldiers, but have double the number of attacks and are significantly tougher. Not only that, they've got their poison attacks, which pretty much kill anything. So at a basic level, they are better than fully trained soldiers. What their biggest problem is, though, is they have a low leadership and they're prone to fleeing because they can be easily intimidated, but they cause a lot of problems. They are scary, scary things.
Yeah, there's a good note about there's a big hill on the outside of Musion, the city, really nasty city over in Bretonia that has a lot of problems with undead disease. There's a hill that's said to be infested with ghouls. And it's got a lot of tunnels and stuff, so they're all in it. And it talks about that the guards, the town guard, the people that maintain Ora Musion, do not go into the mausoleums or the crypts or any of those places in less than groups of 12 fully armored soldiers, because ghouls are a fucking bitch to deal with.
Yeah, particularly when they pack up. When they pack up, you're in trouble. They're nasty.
Yeah. Sam Alden, hey guys, I remember you saying that ghouls have enormous implications for the Warhammer world. What does that mean? You showed up at the right time. We're about to get into it.
Yeah, we're about to get into that one.
Captain Grim, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th makes a distinction between Hish and divine magic mechanically. But in the case of worship lore-wise, could Hish's cleansing light simply be divine magic?
That is what some species inside the Warhammer world believe. Elves, for example, don't believe divine magic even exists. As far as they're concerned, divine magic is nothing more than humans perverting magic, twisting it around and getting it all wrong. So they believe that they're mangling winds up in a very subtle, relatively clever way to make it very difficult to dispel. And the gods themselves seem to somehow like that going on. The human gods, they're crazy. But they don't believe that divine magic comes from gods. They believe it's just magic, and Hish would be directly attached to that. But the answer is, there is not a definite answer. Because what the elves believe is not necessarily the case. So is there a case for that? Yes. Is that the case, though? The answer is explicitly not answered.
And it never should be. Unless like you're in your own personal game and you're having fun with a group of friends and you want that to be your interpretation, that's fine. But like from a big outside point of view, it deliberately should never be answered.
And there is a certain level of it's a human condition as well. Although the roleplay game keeps on messing this up by occasionally saying, "Oh, we'll add divine spells here." It's like, stop it! You're mixing up what is already an established lore point. You're just doing it because you think gods mean spells. Stop! But broadly speaking, it's a human condition.
Elemental exposure. Well, eating a bowl of broccoli cute ghoulism.
I imagine that was meant to be cure.
I know, but it's. I like to imagine he's asking if maybe ghouls are cute eating broccoli.
little ghouls with big heart eyes going, "Oh."
Yeah. Sadly, no. Ghoulism does appear to be a one-way trip. It's not. It's not a disease, even though there are aspects of it that are very similar to a magically created disease.
Oh yeah.
Gills, considering the Dragon Emperor's penchant for purifying creatures and the Cathayans having a more direct relationship with the dead through Shyama, how would Cathayans see/deal with ghouls? That's a great question that we can't answer because it hasn't been attempted by a writer yet.
And I think that this is something that would make for a great story, particularly if you take a look at some of the literature that's come out of the East from various countries and peoples over there, and even modern ones. Take a look at, say, Kingdoms, for example, which comes from Korea. There's a really lovely zombie story based in that, but a lot of that could very easily be a ghoul story retold in a different way too. So there's lots of different ways that it could definitely be used. So yeah. Would be awesome.
Yeah, based on what we've seen of him and what's been talked to us about, like the Celestial Alliance and everything, I would be willing to bet there's been an attempt of this. Now, the real question would be, what happened during the attempt, and did it go good or bad? Because you could tell two very interesting stories going either way.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's going to be a story of one power versus another power and which power wins. And in this case, I would be very interested in suggesting that the ghouls would continue.
Yeah. Though I do think there could be an interesting story of that maybe it is possible to cure ghouldom, but it costs so much effort that it's rejected because it just takes too much. Which kind of has this horrible thing of, oh, there is a cure for this condition, but the thing that could cure you refuses to do it because he says it's not worth the effort.
The bureaucracy.
Which could be equally horrible.
Yeah. There definitely could be a fun story in that.
Don Man, if ghouls are a new species, it seems they can't reproduce. No, they definitely can.
Yes, they definitely can.
Yeah, ghouls can fucking have babies.
Yes,
that is very well established.
Absolutely.
They have families. They have family units as their big clans, I guess would be a decent way to look at it. They take territory. There could be disputes between different types of ghoul clans over territory and feeding grounds. They do make families, which is tragic. It's very tragic. Charles C.K., is the ghoulification a thing for all humans, or do we think that perhaps over in Cathay and Nippon, it might not be the case?
No, I think it's probably the case. I think it
probably is the case.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. And I think that it's better if it is the case throughout because it makes more sense of the entire situation. You don't really want to be adding odd and strange boundaries to such a thing because it suggests that that could then be manipulated. It's effectively a universal constant.
Yeah. That being said, it could be that there are certain cultures that have a natural stronger immunity towards it.
Oh,
Which
I think that there's going to be all manner of different communities which will have different ways of tackling it, different ways of dealing with it. Those who, for example, have cannibalism as a core component of their culture, of which there's bound to be multiple examples of that throughout the Warhammer world, and how those who do that have to be very careful about how they approach their natural, let's say, inclinations, because it could end up resulting in monsters, and how you avoid those monsters and what they believe those monsters are. They will have different versions of what the tales behind what creates them and what doesn't create them.
Darius Rose, who has the Mr. Beautiful smile? What? Who has the Mr. Beautiful smile a ghoul? Conrad, Gore does Backstabber, or Bragg the Gutsman? Are you saying who has the best smile? That I don't
Ghoulish
see how
smile?
that's related, but I don't know. I mean, Gordas has like the big classic Joker smile, but Bragg seems like his smile is genuine. Bragg the Gutsman looks like he's just having a good time. So I'm going to go Team Bragg. Simon the Emperor. Do we think the fact that ghouls, mutants, vampires, and the like can only be human is the primary downside to human adaptability compared to the downsides of the other races that we see created by the old ones?
So first, mutants are not a human condition. Mutation can happen to most species. Mutation some species may be more or less resistant to mutation, and humanity appears to be particularly unresistant to it. But it is worth noting it's not a human condition. The other parts are. But I think you raised something in particular, which is that the old ones clearly did something to humanity, and what they did to humanity ultimately results in the end of the world.
Yeah, humans. Yeah, it's something I don't want to get into super much because I don't think it's in the scope of the stream. But
yeah, so whatever the old ones did to humanity turned them into Chaos's perfect weapon, which is unfortunate. And there is an argument here that Nagash used that.
Yeah, that would be great for a humanity stream, which I know sounds silly, but that is a stream we should do at some point.
I agree completely.
Killsale, Nagash created a rabies virus without killing the host, S tier. That is not a bad way to look at it.
Yeah. I would suggest, because rabies virus gives you the idea that it is something that's communicable, and it's not really communicable, at least as we understand it just now. It would not, however, surprise me if there are communicable versions of it in the Warhammer world, and if a writer at some point has ghouls spreading ghouldom, because it's so close to the general idea of how it works anyway, that some people are almost certain to go down that route at some point, should Warhammer continue to exist through various editions. So it wouldn't surprise me if that happens, but as it currently stands, they're very much not something that has the classic signs of a disease. But it does have the classic signs of a spiritual disease.
Yeah.
In that when certain things happen, you catch that particular infection, you then mutate, and you then devolve. So disease isn't completely inappropriate, but you need to ensure that you add a little descriptor to it, like spiritual or something similar, to make sure it has. And it does appear that all humans have this. So all humans are infected by this, which is mental.
Yep.
It's huge.
I'd be interested to see how Araby deals with ghouls for no other reason that ghouls are originally from the concept of ghouls is originally from Arabia and our own worlds. Is there any information on this? Not that I'm aware of.
There is not.
But I would agree that they should have like a very fun, unique spin on how to deal with it and their history with it.
And I really think that they should. And that very possibly down in Araby, we have not the solution, but we have solutions. We have people who understand what's occurring, what it means, where it's come from, and how to resolve it. So I definitely think that would be one of the fun stories that I would very much like to pick up if we were ever detailing Araby, because that is something that should be picked up.
Yeah, I would actually put that right smack in Araby's golden age, which comes after Nagash destroys Nehekara, but then Nagash gets killed by Alcazar, and like everything kind of collapses on itself. the Tomb King's kind of like Araby's golden age is around this general ballpark. So I would have that be an important part of their golden age as far as like their advancements in medicine and magic and some other fun stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
And it's something that I think is an absolutely core of your writing Araby anyway, where they should have a very clear point where they are significantly ahead of the rest of, say, the old world.
Yeah, and then then they get in the Death Wars with Nagash, where he destroys several cities and other bad shit happens.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so Captain Graham, what if Hinge / Divine Magic is protection from it? It kind of is.
Yeah, to a degree.
And
yeah.
Okay, so I think
that's a complicated subject, though. Yeah.
I think that's enough beating around the bush. We'll get the rest of these super chats in just a moment.
Agreed.
I think let's go ahead and talk about what do we think it is, and then from there we can talk about the Strigoi.
Sounds good.
Because I can see that the super chats are all very just say what it is. So I'm gonna give you my version, and then Andy's probably gonna put it in a much better wording, which is why I want to go first.
Sounds fair. Go. I shall leave you to it.
Yeah. So the core thing and the fascinating thing about ghoulification and my readings of it, which makes me love it as much as I do, because it adds a level of tragedy to it that is unparalleled, is that ghoulification is not caused simply by eating flesh, as we've talked about. That often results in other things or just nothing at all. What seems to cause ghoulification is when people are forced into eating flesh in a sense that they themselves find horrific. It is when someone, through desperation, is forced to engage in a deeply traumatic experience that they seem to hold as irreverent, disgusting, has this extreme emotionally, like at a fundamental deep level, horrible, like violation of nature. Which means, in a sense, in a horrific sense, that by that definition, not intentionally, but it would basically be almost a self-inflicted condition. Because it's culturally relevant. And that if someone is eating flesh through like a religious experience or through a cultural experience where it's not seen as like this horrible negative thing, that it wouldn't result in ghoulification. Or like, this person's joking a little bit, but I actually want to bring this up. There are people in the Warhammer world that seem to eat flesh because there's something genuinely kind of wrong with them, and they don't see the issue in it. They will not become a ghoul.
Yep.
Most of the time.
So to add my small commentary, I agree. I agree completely. We have clean examples across various books of cannibalism occurring from a host of terrible creatures and terrible humans. Most of them are chaos aligned, but not all. Some of them are aligned to gods that are prescribed, like Cain, for example. Nobles who worship Cain and they hunt their own people, drag them into their lodges, having hunted them down, killed them, and eat them like they were a deer that had been captured. And they do not suffer from ghouldom. They don't, over the course of generations, turn into ghouls or anything similar, because they're psychopaths and they're broken in a very different way. It seems to be the nature of the breaking that makes a difference. And it speaks to the human condition to a degree, because it's well known that when humans break in one fashion or another, that they tend to get claimed by one god or another, or things can happen. Mutation can occur. And that definitely appears to be the case here.
And it's almost kind of like Nagash gets you.
And I think I mean, let's not beat around the bush. That's it. So it's obvious what has happened here. Nagash needs something. So he's sitting in Nagashazar being Nagash. So he's getting bigger. He's turning into the god that he is eventually going to be. He is consuming Warpstone. He is learning about Warpstone and its effects in a far more personal and direct way. He's experimenting with magic in a way that has never been done before. He is codifying necromancy and its great effects, and he is building spells that are unlike anything that has ever been done before in Warhammer. This is not using Shyish, the Wind of Death, and doing death magic stuff. He is completely changing how necromancy works into its own way. And we all discuss about the great, big, huge ritual that he does to turn everyone into undead. That, however, is only one spell amongst many that he masters. The 9 great books of Nagash are filled with ancient lore that he creates that just does shit. And one of the things that we can guarantee that he does is this. He takes all of the humans around him and he turns them into his willing slaves, the ghouls. He takes all of those that are worshipping around him, and he leads them in the dark feasts of human flesh consumption that leads them to becoming ghouls. That in and of itself suggests, well, obviously he's the man who creates them. He is. But that's not the only thing that happens, because it then becomes a universal thing in that any humans anywhere in the world that, through one reason or another, through their desperate need to survive or through their horror at what the situation they're in, will devolve into ghouldom if they partake in a particular way. So he has cast a ritual. He hasn't just gone down and said, dark feast time, that makes ghouls. He's already cast the spell, and he's now seeing if it works.
Yep.
And it does. The great spell that no one talks about is the creation of a new species. And they worship him, all of them, everywhere. Because what happens to every single ghoul, I will quote you from the 8th edition army list. Ghouls unconsciously feel the dark magic that surrounds the most powerful undead lords and are drawn inexorably towards it. Once their presence is betrayed, their newfound master quickly dominates their weak and willing minds. They go to the undead and serve. They are the living, worshipping members of Nagash's cult across the world. They are the first true manifestations of Nagash moving towards divinity. If you want to have an answer to what is the ghoul and why it's fundamental, it is that all humans are destined to worship Nagash if they devolve in a particular way. In the same way that all humans are destined to worship one of the Chaos Gods if they devolve in a particular way. The great ritual that we never discuss for Nagash is that he has become a god.
100%.
And humanity is fueling that.
Just remember, guys, being human in the Warhammer world, you're fucked.
Yeah,
there's just different versions of being fucked.
Nagash has done something which has elevated him to goddom, and all humans that follow a particular process become his willing subjects. And you might say, oh, but surely it's undead. He made the undead. All of the undead are extensions of him. All the vampires become extensions of him. There is a reason Mortarks exist. And he basically reaches out his will, and anything that's undead becomes as of him. The big secret ritual, the huge thing that lies behind this is the proof we have that Nagash is already effectively a god. Long before anyone thinks it has occurred, long before Age of Sigmar comes around, it has already come to pass. He is immortal. He is completely impossible to kill. He's not undead as anybody truly understands it, because he got the great potion that meant he never truly dies. He is quite beyond anything in the Warhammer world in many respects. He is special.
20S, So, hey, this comment just made me laugh. If someone in the old one, human design / engineering room needs to be fired. But I mean,
but do they?
Depends on what their goal is. Like,
yes, absolutely.
Maybe they look at
Nagash on that one.
They got Nagash and they went perfect success. But that would be human stream.
I'm making a note here. Huge success.
Yeah. Good job, us. High fives all around. Yeah. That actually ties perfectly into another thing I'm going to do before we get back to the super chat and stuff real fast, which is talking about the Strigoi.
We should do that one.
Yeah, because like Andy said, the thing about ghouls that is particularly noteworthy and is the biggest evidence for this is that they are drawn to large loci or locuses of Nagash's form of sorcery, that necromancy. Because it's not just regular Dar. They're not drawn to like worshippers of the chaos powers. They're
Dark
not
elves.
they're not drawn to dark elves. They're
Yeah.
drawn to the undead. They're drawn to
Mhm.
vampires specifically, or mighty necromancers.
Mhm.
And
Or Nagashazar and Nagash
yeah,
himself.
or Nagashazar,
Yeah.
where there's so many millions of ghouls around Nagashazar. So so what is the relationship between the Strigoi? And here's where I think Games Workshop actually does something really clever. And this is actually specifically pointed out in the Liber Necris, and it's also pointed out in the 6th or 7th edition book. And I love this little lore tidbit, which is that there are many in the old world who and it calls this out as basically being a very racist form of thought, believe that know kind of a little bit about the true nature of ghouls, and they think, oh, well, these are the fallen people of Strigos, where the nation of Strigos fell, and those people were all vampire worshippers. So clearly when their nation collapsed, they devolved into ghouls, and they came north, and they have been a problem. And the Strigani, who are their descendants, also are vampire worshippers, and they're like these horrible backwards people. And the lore very specifically says that is not true, but many people believe it is.
Mm-hmm.
Where what actually happened is the survivors of Strigos fled north away from the mass greenskin hordes, and they became the Strigani, who are a wandering nomadic people that live in many different parts of the old world and face a lot of really nasty racism because people associate them with vampires, even though the vast majority of them want nothing to do with vampires.
Yeah, quite.
They're just trying to live their lives. What actually happened was in the aftermath, the Strigoi vampires, after Ushoran dies, depending on which version of the story you look at, most say he dies, but some say he's kind of more in like a coma somewhere. They all flee, and they try to kind of like buddy up with the other vampires, and it goes really badly for them. Where Vlad massacres a bunch of them because he sees that they're starting to devolve, and he kicks them out. He wants nothing to do with them. Neferata hates them because she just hates her brother and anything associated with him. Blood dragons keep trying to kill them because they think they'll be a worthy battle, and the Necrarchs just want to experiment on them. So they're basically shit out of luck, and nobody's willing to help them. So they go into the wilds because if they're too obvious, other vampires will hunt them down, and if they're too obvious, certain humans will hunt them down and kill them. So they are forced into the absolute fringes of civilization in order to survive. So they basically skulk around graveyards and like trash piles and the wilds, and they feed on animals. They feed on the very recently deceased because they don't want to reveal themselves by feeding on normal people. Because, you know, when a vampire kills someone, if you know what you're looking for, aka being a vampire, it can be very obvious. So they stick to the absolute fringes of society, where there's another species that sticks to the fringes of society, the ghouls. And the ghouls, which most vampires don't like because they're these nasty, gross corpse eaters. They're a pain in the ass to have around because they still have all the needs of living people. So a lot of vampires don't want to deal with them. They don't like them. But the Strigoi found a home with the ghouls, where the ghouls lived in the circumstances they did. They were drawn to them. They, in some cases, would worship them. In some cases, were like a found family to them. And many Strigoi Ghoul Kings become deeply attached to their ghouls, who become this weird sort of court around them. Like they have a sense of family. It's a found family relationship based on the fact that they're both outcasts.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. And it's a fascinating one because there is a level, as I said right at the beginning of the stream, of bullshit here. And the level of bullshit is that all Strigoi must thus have devolved. And all of the vampires that survived the fall of their great city and then became the Strigoi bloodline span out and are shunned by the others for reasons. And those reasons are also clearly bullshit and would never be universal. There'd be more than enough instances where individual Strigoi could easily have been those courtly vampires.
I mean, we got the Black Prince. Black Prince is doing great. He's a Strigoi.
Yeah,
he's
quite.
Cool.
So the first level is it's sort of bullshit. This is a stereotype for what the Strigoi are, but the Strigoi are a more complicated bloodline than that alone. But where the stereotype comes in, it's fascinating because what we have is this outcast vampire that arrives amongst the living and has something that it can feed upon, so it is useful to it. because you can feed upon ghouls.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in many respects, is what creates the great ghoulish Strigoi version of them, as they are filled with this not quite as soul-filled blood, because there's a bit of the soul missing there. They're not quite living. And it's also, they're mutants. And that, in turn, has changed that bloodline into the big ghoul kings that we end up having elsewhere. And I kind of love that.
Yeah, I
it
think
justifies it, explains it, it gives you a reason why this bloodline is so different and what they have become and how they have become it. And I quite like that. It's a nice little relationship between the two.
Really well with one of my favorite descriptions, which is Vlad von Karstein is mostly responsible for writing the Liber Necris, and that's his theory on the Strigoi, is that his hypothesis on how and granted, not all Strigoi are Ghoul Kings, but all Ghoul Kings are Strigoi, is the best way to look at it.
Also correct. Yeah. That's a good way of doing it.
Manfred's theory on the Ghoul Kings is that because they fed on ghouls that had this weird kind of corruptive, dar-heavy blood, missing, like Andy said, missing pieces of themselves, and then they were also feeding on like wild beasts and taking in a lot of bestial blood, that the two mixing in them caused them to become these hulking, monstrous, bestial like vampires.
And I think it's a sensible conclusion, because what we have here are ghouls who have less of a soul, and they're clearly riddled with gur as well. And if you're consuming that as your primary source, you are going to slowly lose yourself, because many of the Strigoi become beasts themselves. They become like the ghouls.
Yeah, it doesn't help that Ushoran's kind of trait is that he was big boy.
Totally. And you could even argue that because of Assuran, they are naturally led towards that as a potential outcome. They like building communities around them and feeding, and when they're outcast, the only communities they have as an easy option are the ghouls. I think that's bullshit, though, because that doesn't make sense. There are only so many vampires, and there's thousands of communities they could have moved to. So it's clearly more than that. We have a bigger story, that this the whole bloodline is cursed in some fashion. Where that curse comes from is not answered. We can make up answers here with ease. You could say that Assuran's responsible, you could say Nagash is responsible, you could say anyone, if you wish, is responsible, and you would certainly get a potentially good answer. But I think what we should definitely say is that the bloodline is cursed. It absolutely is. And if we go to the Age of Sigmar version, that curse stands, because the entire line is screwed. And if you're looking at the entire line being screwed, almost always the only real answer to that is either the founder of the line is broken for some reason and has spread it right down the line, or Nagash. It's one or the other. It's almost certain. Or both. And I think that's probably going to be the case.
Yeah, and actually, reinforce that, Andy, it's worth noting that the Strigoi Ghoul Kings happened after Ushoran puts the crown of Nagash on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's probably the moment when it goes proper wrong. Nagash is almost certainly the one who's responsible for it. So we end up with an entire bloodline of vampires who are naturally drawing these ghouls to them and also feeding upon them and becoming, if anything, the leaders of these cells of religious Nagash fanatics who are centered around undead. In many respects, this is Nagash's great plan made manifest. Small cells of people who can turn other people into the undead next generation. As they move, his great plan to basically wipe out the world of life is slowly but surely coming to place, and all humans are a part of that plan, because all humans are already corrupted with the potential of becoming the next set of ghouls, which in turn will move towards the Strigoi and form groups and cells of dark places. It's a pretty horrific story. Nagash sucks.
I love it, though. It's such a good story. It's terrible, but it's a great story.
And as we said in one of the other streams, it's huge for the Warhammer world. It's absolutely massive, because Nagash is so much more than many think he is in the Warhammer world. All of the undead people say Nagash is a god. Nagash is a god. Should be worshipped as a god. They all say it. But everyone else goes, this is just bullshit. He's just a human. He's just a big necromancer. He's just a great necromancer. No, he's not. He has gone well beyond that.
Man put like a trigger word in every single human soul. in existence, which
Yeah.
like what the fuck?
His a different great ritual. I remember reading a submission once from one of the writers who sadly I didn't hire at the time, who basically said each one of the 9 books of Nagash, it was the bit that I really loved in what he wrote, each one of the 9 books in Nagash ended with a great ritual. So each one of the 9 books had a one. And the 9th book was the culmination of all the previous ones together for the big ritual, which is to kill literally everyone. And I remember reading that going, I love that idea. I sadly don't love everything else you've written, but I love that idea. And I was going to use that idea. I gave them a quick ping. Do you mind if I use this? And they were like, yeah, no, not a problem. And I was like, sadly, I'm not hiring you. And they're like, oh, well, that sucks. But I really like that idea because right at that point, I was like, yeah, one of like the 3rd book of Nagash and the 4th book of Nagash is the Dark Feast.
Yeah, that's actually so well supported as well, because I think
I wanted to bring up Hawk's comment on that one in particular, because it almost feels like the Dark Feast was a curse upon the whole of humanity, and I think that's it. The Dark Feast is one of his great rituals, and the Dark Feast and what it means, you could call it the Dark Feast if you wish, is a massive change to the Warhammer world as a whole and to one entire species that's within it, and it's the species that Nagash thinks should rule the world. Because Nagash thinks humanity is, in many respects, the divine species. It's where he comes from, the Hekara, where they very much believe that they are the chosen people. He believes he is the chosen people, and humans are, by nature, the chosen people. And he very much has put them front and center in what he believes is the correct way that the world should be. Everything dead, ruled by him.
Yep, and once again, we'll save that for Humanity stream because that starts to get very interesting very fast, but we don't have time for it today. Sign of the Empire, All Balls, Skull Takers, and Gorebath streams when? Probably soonish.
I
like
reckon early next year.
Yeah, probably like pretty much when we come back from like Christmas break. Yeah. I don't know if we're like we'll figure that out, but like soon,
yeah, we will.
Soon.
I think very soon because they all deserve attention.
Yeah, Necromancer Kobold, Hex Sigvald loves cannibalism. Yes, that hilariously got him in trouble with his tribe, which is really funny to me. Sign of the Emperor, how and why is the process of ghoulification? So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but to put it really simple now that we kind of talked about it, Morghuls are a very specific set of parameters, which is someone dying in a very cold environment full of a very powerful negative emotions such as anger, bitterness, resentment. It very specifically calls out those things.
Yeah, I'll take a slightly different tack. In the Warhammer world, if you die and you're not ready to die for some reason or another, you become a ghost. And this is not entirely a human condition. Indeed, some species, like the dwarves, are notorious for having various ghosts and spirits inside their various tombs, many of whom are so stubborn they refuse to die properly. And there seems to be some reason that holds the spirit from moving on to the next plane, be that the realm of the gods, the realm of chaos, the aether, whatever you want to call it. And spirits happen. Ghouls are not dead. They lose a portion of their soul, so they are not truly alive either. But they are not dead. Morghuls are dead. They have gone through a different process. So the difference is Morghuls have died through a certain process. They don't move on properly. They become a ghost, and they become a particular type of ghost.
Yeah, if memory serves, there's also a vague suggestion that there are some within the Warhammer believe that there is a etheric entity that lives up in the mountains and stuff and is drawn to people that are going through the Morghuls process and kind of gets into them. So it might be that there's another thing involved.
Yeah, and I think that's very likely. Morghuls coming about for a reason. I think that's totally fine. And I also think it's totally fine if that is, for example, I'll give you a single example that you could have. One of the old lords of Nagash is trapped in the mountains somewhere, frozen, perhaps. And his will has extended out, and he's just waiting to be defrosted in his big chariot of doom. And if you go watch our Nagash stream, you'll give an example of someone who may be responsible for all of those Morghuls, and is indeed perhaps using spirits dying in a particular way to create them, because there's often reasons for these things happening, and that would give you one potential reason for that occurring.
Yeah. but also the Warhammer world is just kind of a place where dying and just being dead is surprisingly hard to do. Mr. Pig, could self-loathing from the person committing the act be partially the reason? Yep.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that part of the core component of the Dark Feast is that you are eroding at yourself. It speaks to the magic of names. And the magic of names is a core component of the ancient magic of Nehekara. And that speaks to what happens to ghouls. They lose their concept of self. They lose their name. And that is big as far as Nehekaran magic is concerned. So it is absolutely a proper application of using everything that Nagash had learned from his previous existence down in Nehekara and from the Dark Elves, and then taking that one step further and saying, this is how I ascend. It makes complete sense.
Yeah, one of the things I think I want to add here is that there is a deep, horrible, tragic irony to when you read some of the army book entries. It always talks about how the people that the Nagashi that devolved into the ghouls were horrible, evil-hearted men that engaged in cannibalism and were divinely punished for it by turning into ghouls. Whereas when you read the stories that delve more into like the actually delve into it, it talks about how Nagash went to the weakest tribes and forced them to engage in a practice and watched over them because, you know, they're terrified. They can't tell them no. And like imagining how, like for me personally, imagining how God horrifically awful those traumatic ceremonies were of the Dark Feast, where from a, you know, when the old worlders think of it, like the Empire and stuff, they're thinking like, oh, it's these heathens that have always been doing this and they're just doing this to play, you know, they're just blah, blah, blah. Whereas in reality, it must have been one of the most nightmarish, horrible, soul gut-wrenching things to ever take place.
Yeah, and I think that what you also need to remember is what happens when they become ghouls. And again, quoting the 8th edition army list gives you the clear line why Nagash would be doing this. Go. Once they're present, let's just get to the important part. Their newfound master, Nagash, quickly dominates their weak and willing minds and can use them any way they want. This is his miners. These are the people who will work tirelessly without complaint. There's going to be no unionization underneath Nagash. He is using the willing and the weak, and he is getting them to do what he wishes. He dominates the entire surrounding area by turning them all into ghouls, and they become his absolute willing slaves.
Man, okay, so the concept of only being turned into a ghoul if people think it's wrong, necessarily. Could people be mutated due to the attraction of both Shaiish, due to the emotion of sadness/grief, and Gur, people are debasing themselves? Like, God, I'm turning into a horrible animal form. Not necessarily how that works.
No, the winds of magic don't mutate in that fashion. You need to have a lot of the winds of magic inside you to change you into something else. Now, the winds of magic can change. For example, all the wizards of the Empire, relatively famous for having arcane marks, and that basically means that through multiple years often of use of a particular wind of magic, it changes your body into something else. Bright wizards become more jittery, their hair tends to go bright orange, they are constantly looking over their shoulder, they're angry people in general, they tend to boom and bellow far more, they take on aspects of the bright wind actually, in the same way that Amethyst wizards become quiet. They become shrouded and by this pall of death. They themselves often become emaciated and skeletal-like because of the magic that they're using. They are low-key mutations. They aren't in world described as mutations. They're described as arcane marks, but the wind is changing them. But that takes often a lot of the wind. It would require a massive upswelling of the wind, a storm of magic. Is not enough alone because they're often sometimes short. We're talking years of this stuff billowing out in preparation for a great chaos incursion, for example. That might be enough to have some people begin to mutate if there's too much of one wind or another in the area, but it generally requires more than just the winds of magic. It's the concentration of the winds into Dar and Warpstone in particular that truly creates mutation. The winds alone are usually not enough.
Yeah, or in this case, a ritual, which is a shit ton of magic. Muffin Baskets. Is Nagashsar and Strigos the only clear signs of ghouls having actual civilization? Strigos did not have ghouls.
No, it didn't.
We'll talk about that in a second. Do they need to flock to creatures of great dar to create something outside of wild disease massive? So okay, Strigos was a normal human nation that eventually got co-opted by vampires who ruled from the top, but it was still made up of humans. Ghouls were not welcomed within Strigos. They would have been cast out and hunted down, all that stuff.
Get the heads.
Strigoi did not become well associated with ghouls until long after the collapse and fall of Strigos. And Nagashazar is calling the ghouls around Nagashazar a civilization. They're not a civilization in the sense that you're thinking civilization.
Yeah, I think they're more of an extension of Nagash's will.
Yeah, they're ants controlled by a queen.
Yeah. That would be a far better way. Don't think of them as this great chanting civilization where they're worshipping Nagash in great droves. That's not really how they're working. They are his slaves. They move like drones, doing what he wishes. They keep threats out. So the chances of Skaven, for example, easily making their way into that place.
Yeah,
it's going to be tough.
There is a group inside of like the fortress of Nagashazar itself. There is
Slay Go
Nagash.
Queen.
Oh yeah,
go Queen.
There is a group as like a civilization within Nagashazar itself of these like terrifying wraith lords and like their subjects, but they're a very niche group. Whereas there's like millions of ghouls surrounding Nagashazar, but they're very rarely inside of it itself.
Yeah, agreed.
Charles C.K. Andy's previously said Dark Elves had necromancy for Nagash. Is his work with magic and all after based on it fundamentally different? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What the elves had before, and let's just make sure that we are clear here. The Dark Elves are not the only elves who have this. All elves have this. The Dark Elves merely took down the dark magic route far further than the High Elves who went down the high magic route. But all elves understand Shyish. And Shyish is the Wind of Death. And the Wind of Death allows all sorts of manipulations of spirits and things that haven't moved on, and also allow you to help them move on. There are darker and lighter aspects of how that wind can be used. Necromancy, as in the ability to use magic to influence the dead, is a core component of one of the core winds of magic. Do not think that necromancy is purely what Nagash does. There is a broader umbrella thing here going on, and it's something that causes the writers endless trouble, because every time they go, so what does someone who studies the Wind of Death, what do we call them? The actual answer is necromancer. But whenever you use the word necromancer in Warhammer, it means someone who's using Nagash's version of magic. And Nagash's version of magic is almost entirely humanocentric. It isn't entirely, but it's almost entirely. Most of the skeletons that are involved, most of the spirits that are involved were human. Were almost always, not quite, grounded in what he thinks are important. And his magic is, in terms of what it does, considered to be, by most elves, utterly unacceptable, and is laced through with dar in a way that makes the Dark Elves go, well, holy shit.
Yeah, there's a amount of notes you can look at Nagash's magic where if you actually like read the names of the spells and some of the invocations and stuff, the thing that becomes really weird and apparent is that Nagash basically bastardized a bunch of different forms of magic and sort of assembled something really gross out of it, kind of like how necromancy does, where he took like a lot of dark magic, he took the divine magic of Nehekara, he took light like Hish and Shyish, and he kind of went just made some really nasty shit out of it.
Yeah, he creates an entirely new brand of magic which utilizes the material components of corpses. It's not about spirits, which is what the Wind of Death does. The Wind of Death is all about spirits and the souls that have passed on from the material bodies. It's not about manipulating material corpses. And he starts saying, hey, this part of the material component, because in Nehekaran magic, your corpse is a part of your soul. And he takes just the corpse parts and he goes, hey, I'm now going to use other spirits and I'm going to do other stuff and force it in there and animate it. I'm going to use magic to make this part of the soul do stuff. It's a very Nehekaran view of how the soul works, and elves find it to be an abomination. It is an absolute horror show because it's taking other people's souls and doing terrible things to them. bits of their bodies being used in horrible ways. Yeah, it's an abomination of a magic as far as the elves are concerned. So yeah, it's a very different type of necromancy to what the Wind of Death does.
Flux, Manny says that Ghoul lacked, like Ab, the concept of morals, and Ren, the concept of self. Is it possible Nagash has essentially created a hive mind / mind hive of people who resent their survival? Is he the hive queen? Yeah, kind of, essentially.
I mean, ultimately, yes. Manfred's view, again, this was from the Liber Necris, Marion von Stauffer's book. Manfred's view is that they have literally lost parts of their soul. And because they've lost parts of their soul, they are, in truth, undead. They are no longer properly living, which is why we get this lovely cusp view that sits in the army lists. And the manifestation of that through into the Liber Necris is this cusp view is there for a reason. The cusp, the reason that between living and dead is because they've lost parts of their souls. They're not, strictly speaking, alive anymore. But later on, after the writing of the Liber Necris, they then become full undead. Where before that, they weren't. Before that, they were very much, oh, ghouls, they're doing a thing. Almost as if they'd read the Liber Necris. They went, nah, fuck it. Let's just make it nice and easy. They're all fucking undead. And we've got a justification for it over here in Liber Necris too, which is kind of sweet. But I've got a personal belief that they hadn't even bothered reading that one. They just went, let's go ahead. Let's just go ahead for game balance and reasons.
Because I agree with Andy. I also love that it gives Warhammer a very unique definition of the term undead, which is someone that is undead is someone that is missing a part of their soul. Which is a very Warhammer-centric idea and also works really well and also could open up a lot of really fun avenues of messing around with concepts of magic and soul stealing and dealing with etheric issues and like people losing parts of themselves and how horribly debilitating it is.
I mean, I don't think that's a controversial claim. I think that's pretty much what it is. But do be aware that there are multiple entities within the Warhammer world that only have certain parts of a soul. And if you want to know what the parts of the soul are, go check out Liber Necris. It's got a nice breakdown of one version of what the different parts of the soul are. But if we take, for example, a classic example of just a Warhammer spirit, like a spite or something like that, it doesn't, strictly speaking, have a corpus, which is considered to be part of the soul. It just doesn't have that. What it has is the spiritual part, the intellect, and all the rest of it all put together, a sense of self and so on.
Or so I guess I rephrase that as taking something that had all of the components and then
stripping it apart. Absolutely. And necromancy in particular seems to be very much concerned about stripping apart different bits of the human soul. And whilst necromancy can sometimes work on other species, and we've got multiple examples of where it has worked on other species, it seems to be primarily concerned with humans in particular.
Yeah, which I think that does such a good job of showing off very easily in an easy to understand way why necromancy would be seen as so much more abhorrent than so many other forms of magic.
Yes.
And that the whole point, literally its fundamental building block as a lore of magic, is to take a fully souled human and to rip out unnecessary parts.
To control it.
Yeah, to control it. From the like it is a gross, disgusting use of magic.
Yeah, and when even Dark Elves look at it and say, yeah, that's just not right. Because it speaks to Dark Elf religion as well and Dark Elf culture. They don't believe stripping the soul apart and flaying it like that is the correct way of doing things. They manipulate and control using very different tools. They think that is, I mean, it's tantamount to, think of whatever in your culture out there is considered to be a high crime. And what Nagash does is a high crime. He flays souls into ribbons. And that's just wrong.
Yep. Lorebeards Kobolds, the Fortress of Vorag and the Tower of the Bloody Tooth have connections to the Ghouls' history. Yes! So Vorag is a great example. So Vorag Bloody Tooth, for those that don't know, was the first great Ghoul King. Is kind of like, he's typically known as the first Ghoul King, even though he probably, he kind of was, it doesn't matter. A very brief description in the interest of time is that when Stragos fell, Vorag was like a big boy. Like, he was one of Ushoran's favorites. He was turned by Ushoran himself, so he's like a first generation. But after Stragos falls, he kind of runs around stuff, but he devolves into a Ghoul King. And despite that, he had a deep, deep obsession with there was a compulsion that was pulling him towards Nagashazar. Now, initially in his story,
let's call it Nagash.
Towards Nagash. Initially in his story, it's played that he's drawn towards Strigos or in Morkane, but it's revealed that that's not true because he builds up a big army of ghouls, like biggest ghoul army the world's ever seen. It was horrible, and he swarms across the Badlands, swarms into the Marshes of Madness. And if he was going for Morkane, that's where he would have stopped, but he doesn't. He goes through the mountains, over the World's Edge Mountains, makes it into the Southern Darklands, and there he takes over and builds up a big, scary fortress, which is the Fortress of Vorag, where he's building up to sweep over. Now, in some versions, most versions we have of the story, it says that he's building up to go back over the mountains and take over Morkane and rebuild Strigos, which may be true. But based on what we've been talking about here, it almost seems more likely that he would have gone to Nagashazar and tried to take over, or been drawn to it.
I think it's far more likely. Just keep it simple. Nagash is controlling these relatively devolved entities like drones. He is bringing a large lieutenant to guard one of his entry points into Nagashazar. It's relatively simple.
Yeah, and then
you don't need to get more complicated than what actually happens.
He got killed by sheer stupid chance. Genuinely, he got shot in the heart by a goblin.
You're to blame.
A goblin bolt thrower shot him in the heart by sheer stupid chance and killed him. And then he may or may not have gotten resurrected, depending on certain versions of the story you look at.
Vampires are effectively immortal, so they're always going to be coming back at some point because their corpuses are always out there. They don't have the same issues that many other undead have because their soul essence parts are stripped out. They are entirely material creatures, meaning that no matter how many times you kill a vampire, it's very possible it can be brought back again.
Yeah, but that's Vorag Bladetooth, and the reason I really love him is that he is credited as the first ever Ghoul King, and it is very fairly described as such.
Yep.
Charles C.K., Nagash, 40K's God Emperor of the Morning here. They are very, very similar characters.
And my third last major Warhammer campaign, Nagash's entire raison d'etre was to become God Emperor of 40K. For a host of reasons. It was a proper stupid game though.
Yeah. But yeah, they're very similar. A lot of people like to compare the Emperor and Sigmar, and I think actually comparing Nagash to the Emperor is far more accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. Although the roots of the good old God Emperor 40K are very different for obvious reasons. But
True.
Yeah, I think Nagash is not a bad shout, particularly when you just look at all the iconography that the Emperor uses.
Yeah, though rather amusingly, instead of having 20 so-called sons, Nagash had his accidental vampire children. Elijah Snow, what other influence would you draw on to flesh out the Strigani? I think that the Tal'Darim culture or the Yellow River Nomads, what would you draw on? I don't know enough about those, but the Strigani are they're an interesting group because, in my opinion, and granted, this is just my opinion, you don't have to agree with it, anyone out there, there's a lot of fantasy settings that like to pull up kind of the gypsy stereotype. And that's kind of what they are, but they're surprisingly better fleshed out than that in the lore that I read, which tends to be a bit on the newer side, where the Strigani characters you meet are always like really awesome, and they're not what you expect when you initially encounter them, because you're like, oh, this is going to be like one of those. And you're like, oh no, okay, these guys are actually fleshed out and human and have like they're normal and they have human cult and they're like just they're trade. They deal with a lot of trade mainly, where they trade using river barges or caravans. That's like their whole big thing.
Yeah.
And that most times I've seen them, the books kind of go out of their ways to show that the people, like the peasantry of the Empire or Bretonia or the border princes that they deal with, tend to be much shittier people than they are, like way shittier. So they actually tend to be pretty decent. But that being said, I think any culture that is primarily nomadic and is known for not really having like a roots down homeland is probably a reasonable place to look for inspiration on designing certain elements.
Yeah, agreed broadly. The foundation of the Strigani is born of basically attempting to recreate Dracula's use of gypsies, and relatively racist use at that. And I use the word gypsy there because it primarily is how they're described in Dracula. Now, I understand that that's a term that many people find deeply offensive, but I will note I have friends who call themselves gypsies. Literally. It is the term they use to describe themselves. They don't use Rom or traveling folk or anything similar. They literally call themselves gypsies. And they get into arguments with mostly white people saying that they can't use the word, which is hilarious.
I witnessed that at the Ren Festival earlier this year.
Actually hilarious when you get somebody who's a heart-wrenched white person saying, you can't do that, you can't call yourself that. It's like, it's literally what I call myself, it's what we are. But there are terrible stereotypes that were initially deployed, and other writers have come along and attempted to erode that and turn them into a fully fleshed out people, not just cackling stereotypes of traveling folk who are there to steal your children and are attached to vampires and they're going to drink your blood. So yeah, I think the Strigony are not too bad. Yeah, I'm going to bring this one. It's just don't bring up the White Wolf book. Oh, holy mention, the White Wolf Gypsy book. Let's just not bring that one up. And you just did, and I just did. It's not great, and don't buy it. It's an old one, the Old World of Darkness book. I owned it back in the day, and I remember when I got it, and I was like, uh-oh. Yeah, it was a book.
Yeah, because like you could pick up for free, completely for free on the Drive-Thru RPG website. You could pick up If Looks Could Kill, which is a really awesome group of Strigony characters in it.
Yeah, that was a conscious decision because there was concern about using the Strigony at all. And I was like, nah, fuck that. Not using them is more racist than fricking using them in the first place. There's an established part of the Warhammer world, and I would much prefer not to walk away from these older things that have often been used not very well.
Yeah, what I will say,
use them well.
Yeah. The last thing I want to add is that just because I've seen sometimes people are like, oh, that the Lorebeards say you can't use people as bad guys. No. Like one of my favorite depictions of a Strigony, when you're using them as villains, that I think makes for a really compelling story, is there's a storyline. Oh, I can't remember what book it's from. There's a really old storyline where there's a Strigony river barge that has a Strigoi vampire with them. Then they're running around, and the main impetus behind their story is that there are some Strigony who deeply, deeply desire to reclaim their homeland, to go back and have a place where they belong, a place that was theirs and was taken from them by greenskins, and they want a home back. They don't want to be wandering nomads that aren't welcome everywhere they go anymore. So they get a relationship with the Strigoi vampires because they believe, like some of them have prophecies about how Ushoran will rise again, and if he ever does, they'll be able to go home and reclaim and rebuild and have their own nation. And
because that makes for a homeless, oppressed people, and their lives are rough.
And like that would technically, for most Wolfrip games, make them an antagonist group because they're working with a fucking Strigoi vampire. But you can make a really compelling group of villains that your characters may be like, wait, I kind of agree with these guys, and that might change your campaign. Or your characters may go, I understand why you're doing this, but I still have to stop you. And it makes for it's a good campaign. I think it can make for a really good campaign.
Yep, agreed. Strigony are kind of awesome, but they have some problematic elements because some writers haven't used them very well. But yeah, they're good.
Yep. Phil, is there any way Strigoi could use their ghoul underlings to wield power in a subtle way, on a smaller scale than the rest of the vampiric cousins? Also, humans being escape test subjects rather than old one creations is probably the simplest. That would be a very simple explanation, though.
I don't think it's the correct one.
I agree. But so use their ghoul underlings to wield power in a subtle way. Yes, there are some that do. Not all Strigoi ghoul kings are insane bestial creatures. Some of them are very clever. Ghouls are very good at a number of things. They're very stealthy. They're very good at moving around unnoticed. They're very good at digging tunnels, moving under things. So you could have a Strigoi who maybe is using them to dig under places, to undermine things, or to get into places where people couldn't. But ghouls are very good at climbing. They're very good at sneaking around. The big thing that ghouls are heavily credited for is that Strigoi use them to screw with things that repel undead, because they don't work against ghouls. So Strigoi will often send ghouls ahead into like a Morite cemetery or Garden of Mor to screw up, like to steal the holy artifacts, scratch out any holy symbols or whatever, so then the vampire could come in with no problems whatsoever. So they are often used very, very cleverly. They can be used to spy on people. They can be used to like draw enemies away because it's like, oh, there's something, some creatures are attacking things over here and the vampire's distracting you so he can do stuff over here. They're very good at being wielded to distract or to sneak.
Yes, I think the core component of all that is that Nagash and his plan involves literally taking out everything. But undead can be stopped. Ghouls do not fall underneath the undead category when it comes to, for example, getting into places that resist undead. So, yeah, they are a useful tool.
Yep. Phil, just stuck back in Mortar's delusion. Perhaps part of your soul believing you're still alive is a core part of undeath. A lot of undead characters seem to be obsessed with grand designs and schemes that always end up in them dying, yet they continually just trudge on. Food for thought.
I'd say that there's a large component of Nagash in that entire thought process also. Nagash does ultimately influence all undead creatures in some form or another, which causes horror for many vampires. Many vampires who have higher thinking, they very much have a sense of self. And the idea that there could be an entity out there influencing them terrifies them. Manfred in particular is known for
Manfred's obsessed with that. And which is why
with it because he himself wants to have control. And the idea that there is this godlike figure on the periphery who can reach out and make him do things is terrifying to him. So yeah, I think that can definitely be justified to a degree, but you've definitely got some points there.
Muffin Fest, I love that the stream has just been 2+ hours of ghouls are weird and sagely nodding to each other, and I'm all for it.
Isn't that true? All of our streams?
All right, and then this one, and then we got to hit one last thing, and then we can wrap up. Charles C.K., can ghouls speak / communicate coherently usually? Not usually, but very rarely they sometimes can.
So, yeah, they've clearly got some form of basic communication in that they can make sounds and point, and they can definitely get things moving in different directions, almost like basic, relatively high intelligent animals. Many animals have got methods of communicating with each other in a variety of different ways. Ghouls are similar. But what they've got is a brain, and that brain can receive commands from that which they listen to commands to, and that tends to be the local undead character who comes along, goes, "Hi, I'm Bob the undead guy," and the ghoul goes, and Bob the undead guy goes, "Hey, you're a ghoul, why are you hanging around me?" And he goes, and he goes, "Hey, okay, well, since you're here, could you go over there and grab me some willing virgin?" Runs off, pulls the body in. "Excellent, I'll drink it dry, you have the corpse." Well, that worked really well. So they have all of the capacity for rational thought, but they have no rational thought. But external entities can control their bodies without needing to use the great spells of undead, which is what you would use to control corpses. They're basically walking corpses without the need of spell use because their brains are still there, leading to ghouls being incredibly effective tools for anyone who's effectively a necromancer or similar. Nagash has turned them into walking slaves who are more than intelligent enough to carry out all the orders that they ask, while simultaneously nowhere near intelligent enough to raise up against him.
Yeah. And that being said, there are exceptions. Like someone mentioned earlier, there's a ghoul. Yeah, there's a ghoul character in the Barony of the Damned who could talk just fine. But
in fact, I'd say exceptions are almost going to be the norm because they are ultimately a mutated species. And whilst many of them might be second, third, fourth, fifth generation ghouls or whatever, as they've bred and made more ghouls down through that time, many of them are first generation ghouls, ones who've devolved, and that whole process won't always work in the same way. For some, they'll keep their intelligence. For some, they'll get much bigger, or they won't be as lopey or weird. Others will have big, long, stringy hair instead of the relatively bald versions we're most commonly going to see. It is, after all, a mutation at its heart, but it seems to be a relatively consistent one, and not just because all the ghoul miniatures look relatively similar, but because the process itself has always been depicted as creating something which is pretty much in this area. So yeah.
Speaking of mutation, we have one last little group to talk about with the ghouls, which was a very last kind of minute, unfortunately, addition, which were the Crypt Horrors. So Crypt Horrors, pretty much what it says on the tin. They are very, very big ghouls, but the lore behind them is actually kind of interesting. because it takes that relationship between the Strigoi Ghoul King and the Ghoul Horror to it, or Crypt Ghoul, to its natural evolution, to its natural meeting point, which is that a lot of vampires, when they have very loyal or like underlings they're fond of, will give them what's known as the blood kiss, where they give them blood and they do this whole transactional thing and turns them into a vampire. The Ghoul Kings do something different, which is that they slice open their palms or their veins, and they allow their most favored ghouls to drink their blood. But it's not a true blood kiss because they don't go through the whole process. It's just the ghoul feeding on their blood. And the ghoul will lap it up, and then the ghoul will go through a very nasty little process where the ghoul does something really interesting, which is that they recreate the ritual. Because in order to become a crypt horror, a ghoul will drink the blood and it will go into a frenzy where it eats other ghouls. Now, it's very specific in the lore tidbit that it eats its own kin. It doesn't eat like random people or corpses. It starts attacking other ghouls and consuming them. And this causes it to mutate and grow bigger. And it repeats this process over the course of 1 month. And at the end of the month, it is this massive, swollen with muscle creature. Its spine has grown so much that it's usually erupting out of their back with like spikes. They are huge. And one of the things that's really fascinating about them is they're still in that weird, not technically undead, but not technically alive. But their case is so extreme that it talks about their bodies are such furnaces of dar because of the repeating of that ritual, that when they take damage, the dark magic, the dar that's in them, it speeds up their metabolism so much that they regenerate. But, and I actually didn't know that, or had forgotten this until I reread it today, they die very quickly because that dark magic burns them from the inside out. So they have this really fast metabolism, and they're these really powerful shock troops, and they're really scary, but they are literally on a very relatively short time frame because it literally just kind of burns them to death from the inside out.
Yeah, they're laced through with dar, and dar is by its very nature corrupting, and it corrupts their poor little bodies, which have gone through an absolute horror show of a process. For those of you that know other games, basically they've gone, hey, you know Vampire the Masquerade's ghouls? And you know how Masquerade the Vampire, Masquerade ghouls, they take vampire blood and they become stronger, faster. Let's do that with our ghouls. And they went, yeah, okay, what's that? What we call them? Crypt horrors, because we've got crypt ghouls. Let's go. And they've just copy pasted that over, and they've gone, let's turn it into a giant ghoul that kills everything. Woohoo! And that's the process. And I like it. I think it's great. It's mixing the vampire blood, which is known in multiple sources to have extraordinary capabilities, to provide, extraordinary capabilities to humanity. It's known that if you take in a vampire's blood, you sometimes get stronger. You sometimes gain the memories of the vampire. You sometimes get access to some of that vampire's powers. Vampire blood does shit. It's pretty potent shit. And when you put a vampire blood into a ghoul, it does, it interacts with the underlying dar, the lack of soul that's there, and it makes it get bigger. It goes in a big ravenous spurt as all that extra flesh has to come somewhere, as it eats everything, turns into Megazord, the ghoul, and goes out and starts kicking ass and chewing gum, according to the whims of the vampire that made it, because after all, they are nothing more than extensions of those core necromantic wills. So yeah, that's fun. I like that one.
How are we going to deal with these crypt horrors? Oh, crypt horrors. Puts away Kane.
Yeah.
And fuzzy purple robe. Yeah. Crypt horrors would probably might well be a thing, but would be a very different threat entirely. Ricky Chapman, crypt horror versus Necron flayed one. Well, crypt horrors are quite a bit bigger, but Necrons are very spooky.
The Necrons are probably a good bit stronger too if you take their machine bodies.
Yeah, it would be an interesting fight because like the Necron has the thing of like it can put itself back together kind of in the longer term, but the Crypt Ghoul has like Crypt Horror's regen is nuts. Like they have that troll level, you lop off an arm and the arm just starts coming back immediately bullshit.
Yeah, totally. They've got the regenerate rules because they are now full of magic and they are they're scary things. They're basically ghoul plus 5. They're amazing. They rock, but they eventually burn out because of the enormous quantities of magic that they have within them. But they are incredibly potent weapons. And given that ghouls are 10 a penny, you got frickin' hundreds of them probably. Adding an extra, 5, 10, 15 horrors to your arsenal when you're attacking someone is absolutely a good use of this almost massive expendable resource that you have anyway. None of the various vampires et al. That use ghouls particularly care for the ghouls, although some do, it's worth noting.
Well, even then, it's like you're a vampire. You're an immortal entity with a mortal lifespan creature that it's, even if it lives and dies of old age, it's probably not going to, like, to you, you blink and it's dead.
Yeah, absolutely. And ghouls in particular, I mean, there'll be some vampires who treat them like pets, some who just treat them like tools to be used. Each vampire is very different. But yeah, that's your crypt horrors. Crypt horrors are basically mega ghouls that burn out.
Yeah, they were a very fun addition to 8th edition, though. I did quite like that sort of a bit. But that kind of brings us a bit to the end of today's show.
Yeah. So I think it's always nice to end in some form of conclusion.
I agree.
Where we sit down and we go, so what did we learn? What is the new stuff that laid out? And I think here we can consolidate certain hints that we've been laying out in several previous streams. And that's that ghouls have a significant message about the setting as a whole. And their lore doesn't say this. At no point does it say, this proves Nagash is so much more than many thought. This proves that Nagash is the god that all of the various undead entities claim he is. But it kind of does. Because what we have here is an entire group of mutated humans that are consistent and appear to be able to come from any human population under express, almost ritualized circumstances. And when those circumstances arise, the ghouls arise after and immediately find local necromancers, those who use the winds of magic according to Nagash's design. He has effectively turned all of humanity into part of his long-term plan. And it speaks to the overall planning of Nagash as a whole. Yes, he dies at various points, but he doesn't ever really die. One of the big mistakes when viewing Nagash is to think he has ever died. He hasn't. He's been defeated and had to incorporate himself. And even when he's doing that, he's still conscious. His spirit is lashing out and doing things at all times. He is effectively a god, and this is one of the proofs of that statement. Ghouls and the various holes in the lore that don't make sense absolutely do make sense when you realize where they came from, what happened afterwards, and how they are used by all of the various other undead entities. Now, is this a conclusion from the lore rather than what the lore suggests? The answer is yes. It absolutely is. The lore at no point says Nagash made ghouls to be this and all of humanity suffers from it. It doesn't say that specifically, but it does say that Nagash created the ghouls, so maybe it does. And it also says any human that devolves into cannibalism and has it bad turns into a ghoul. So it does sort of say it. It just doesn't say it with the intent of the writer behind it saying, oh, Nagash made this happen for reason X, Y, and Z. It's just that they've written it and the conclusion sits there on the page, but has never truly been drawn by any of the books. I was going to draw it. This was a conclusion I was going to be writing into my third campaign. A campaign that was going to come after Pass of the Old Ones called The Orders. We're going to do that as part of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And we were going to make ghouls part of the bigger picture and explaining what they were, where they came from, why the Ghoul Kings were a thing, why the Strigoi were a thing, how all of it was part of one big Nagash picture, and how Nagash had a big plan because he's supposed to be this godlike entity. But Warhammer often wrote him as basically a foil for some other character to kick in to show how tough they were. Hey, Sigmar kicked them in. Oh, curse all the vampires because of that. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, no, Nagash.
Yeah, he got avatared of Caned a few times.
yeah, he absolutely did, and that clearly required some sort of addressing at some point. But that never happened. But the words are still on the page. So if you're sitting out there going, how could I use ghouls in my games? Just use the words that are written into the 8th edition army list. And that is that Nagash created them. The big dark feast was his process of making the first ghouls. That the ghouls spread out all around Nagashazar, and his first experimentation in creating the ghouls worked. And then after that, ghouls started popping up all over the Warhammer world, wherever cannibalism or wherever the dark feast was recreated. It's on the page already. You don't need to create lore for this. It's all there. Ghouls are the worshippers of Nagash. Ghouls are completely the tools of necromancy, and ghouls are just waiting to be used by all the various followers of Nagash, wittingly or not, and all undead are unwittingly followers of Nagash, even when they think they're not. After all, as we covered in the good old Dreadlords of Nagash, let's go through our various Mortarch stream, he can pretty much take any of the undead and make them his anyway, even when they don't want to do that. Along comes Manfred and tries to surprise betray him, but he can. The undead are his pawns. And that is what the ghouls add to the lore. That all the undead are his pawns, and that he is a god. Which is crazy, which I really like.
Yep, Warrington Crescent. Thank you for the cheer. That is not dead, which can eternal lie, and after strange eons, even death may die. Nagash finds this unambitious.
He absolutely does, Mornington Crescent. I wrote into, I think, Tome of Salvation 2, I think it was the Tome of Salvation for 2nd edition, something along the lines of Nagash, whose existence was ill-measured by millennia or centuries or something, and just cannot and never did die. Because it's a core component of what the Nagash character is. He is the source of undead magic as we understand it, but he himself, for all he follows undead rules like all the rest of them do, he's not strictly speaking undead. He is something quite different.
Yeah, which, by the way, for anyone out there, if you ever have the opportunity to pick up a copy of the Liber Necris and read it, it is such a fun, wild ride that does such a cool job painting the Warhammer world's undead. And there's, to reinforce what Andy's saying, there's actually a page that's supposedly from one of the books of Nagash, where Nagash is talking about when he quote unquote died. And it's a trip because it just shows how he's no longer anything remotely mortal, and he's not really anything remotely human at that point either.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
one of the big mistakes is to think of him as a lich, because that's a necromancer who has become undead, effectively, who continues on in death. He doesn't continue on in death. He never strictly dies.
Yeah, because there's to kind of sell to home, if he was undead, the scene that you have with him talks about how if you're undead, you don't deal with things like severe pain or exhaustion or any of these other things because you're fucking dead. Your brain no longer is dealing with those sorts of responses. There's a really cool quote in it where Nagash has walked beyond his body, realized it, and kind of doubled back and found his body again. And he's trying to animate his own body. And it talks about how, from Nagash's perspective, he can't hold his body too tightly, because if he does, he feels his brain rotting and he feels the exhaustion in his muscles. Like, he literally has the sensation
sits outside,
of working with a brain that is partially dead, even though he's like, I'm not dead. So he has to like very gingerly keep himself in this precarious balance until he later finds the Sour Sea and Warpstone, and then he is fine again. But it's a fascinating look at what he is, which is very, very different from anything that would truly be described as undead.
Yeah,
because like we talked about, Nagash still has all of his soul.
Yeah, I mean, he took the elixir of life. He literally can't die. His body can rot, it can go through various things, but it will regrow, it will move back into its place, it will reform, no matter what sort of horrors are placed upon him. He is not a normal undead folk. And ghouls put that in place, which I kind of love.
Yeah, and that brings us to the end of today's stream, and also to the end of the month of birthday.
It had to end eventually, didn't it? Thank you all. I'm really glad we did that. But next week, we're going to be going over to Joseph Bugman. because our vote for the last one was so very, very close. That'll be over on Sotek's channels, which will be super fun. Also, just as a small aside, if you are a patron over on the Inside the Rookery stuff, where we talk about gaming stuff all the time, I will note, if you haven't sent over your address yet, to get all the
I need to do that.
So all the Christmas stuff. It's one of the reasons why I'm bringing it up, because I know you haven't. If you haven't sent over your address yet, do so, because we're sending out Christmas stuff. Now, I'm not saying that, for example, there are definitely things that we're going to be sending, and I'm not saying that I'm aware of some of the things that might be sending as I move it across the screen, but there are definitely things that we are sending out. And if you're interested in getting access to the masterclass that I'm doing on Tuesday, do sign up over on Inside the Rookery's Patreon, because I'm doing a masterclass about mapping GM maps on the Tuesday, and that's for our patrons. But also, if you just sign up just now, you've got a few days left where you'll just get sent some packages from us, because we're sending some packages over on the Inside the Rookery side. So if you haven't done that yet, go do it, because I know Lindsay is waiting for various addresses. Other than that, thanks all. I'm really looking forward to Joseph Bugman. It'll be super fun, and we will hopefully see you on the Wednesday, assuming that we don't go mad.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll see you this Wednesday for part 2 of the Lizardman City creation, which part 1 was super fun. I highly recommend watching it. It was actually a really good time, very relaxed and good time. And I'm going to remind Andy now that he's going to have a Discord channel up on his Discord where you can submit ideas if you can't make it for the stream. I've also got one up on my stream for the city Lakotl, the city of dread. So it's been a very good time.
How'd you spell Lakotl again?
Loqotl.
O-T-L. L-O-Q-O-T-L. Excellent.
Yep. And we will have a vote up on the Lawhammer channel after this stream for what the next Sunday thing will be beyond Bugman. Don't know if we're going to do a stream that Sunday. We might be off for the holiday.
Let's not do a vote. Let's have it be one of the characters that we were discussing at the start of next year. Because that makes it super easy. Maybe Arbol or something like that. That'd be super fun.
Cool. We'll figure that out in a minute.
In fact, Arbol would be great.
Great. We'll do Arbol the Undefeated.
Let's do Arbol the Undefeated next year. There we go. So our first stream on the Sunday next year, on whichever day we eventually choose to do it, will be Arbol the Undefeated. That was easy. And then we'll pop a vote up around about then as well for other stuff.
Okay, great. So, yep, that wraps us up for today. We'll see y'all on Wednesday. And thank you for making Andy's celebration great and awesome. Thank you for all the super chats and donations and everything.
Thank you. You kick ass. We love you all. And have yourself a merry time in this lovely festive season. We will see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Yep, bye-bye.